9 months ago, Jackson Wolf married his assistant. The woman he'd paid $150,000 to save her father's life. The woman who taught a mafia boss that love meant open hands, not closed fists. But before that wedding, there was a phone, a jealous demand, and a discovery that shattered everything. She was planning to quit. He thought she was leaving for another man. She was really trying to save her father. He didn't know. She couldn't tell him. For 7 days, he watched her smile at her phone. For 7 days, jealousy consumed him. On day 8, put the phone on my desk, unlock it. Now, she thought he'd find a boyfriend. He found $847 in her bank account. He found texts. Dad needs $87,000 in 7 days or he dies. He found her resignation letter. The mafia boss who controlled everything was about to learn that the only thing more powerful than control was trust, and it started the moment he looked at a phone that changed both their lives forever. This is that story. Jackson Wolf was not a man who shared not his empire, not his time, and definitely not the woman whose soft laugh had just been stolen by another man's face on her phone screen. The office was too quiet for his liking, the kind of silence that amplified every small sound into something that demanded attention, that required analysis, that fed the control he'd spent 15 years perfecting. Jackson could hear everything from his glass-walled corner room, the keyboards clicking in steady rhythm, the low murmur of voices in the main area discussing contracts and deadlines, the occasional ring of a phone that someone would answer with practiced professionalism. And then there was the sound that had been driving him to the edge of his carefully maintained composure all week. A soft vibration, then another, then another. He didn't even need to look up to know where it came from. Vivian Croft's desk. She sat right outside his office, positioned at the sleek mahogany workstation that served as the first line of defense between him and the rest of the world. Every visitor passed through her, every phone call, every document, every calendar change, every decision that reached him had been filtered through her efficiency first. He relied on her more than he admitted, even to himself. More than was probably wise for a man in his position. But lately, Vivian was also the source of something he was not accustomed to handling, a constant, inexplicable pull that had nothing to do with business, and everything to do with the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was concentrating, the way her voice softened when she thought he couldn't hear her on personal calls, the way she existed in his peripheral vision like a presence he couldn't ignore even when he tried. Again, he muttered internally, his eyes flicking toward the frosted glass where her silhouette moved. She was on her phone. He could see her head tilt down, fingers moving fast across the screen, shoulders giving a small, inward shake, that private laugh that suggested intimacy with whoever was on the other end. That suggested a world he wasn't part of. That suggested she belonged to someone else in ways that had nothing to do with the 40 hours a week she gave him. He hated how his chest tightened at the exclusion. Hated the jealousy that crawled under his skin like poison. She could talk to whoever she wanted. She could text whoever she wanted. She was his employee. He was her boss. That was all. That was supposed to be all. Except it hadn't been all for months now. Maybe longer. Maybe since the day she'd walked into his office for her interview 2 years ago, wearing a burgundy blouse and carrying a portfolio that proved she was overqualified for an assistant position, but taking it anyway because she needed the salary more than the title. Maybe since the first time she'd looked him directly in the eye and answered his deliberately intimidating questions with calm competence that suggested she wasn't afraid of powerful men or the dangerous world they operated in. Another soft laugh reached him through the half-open door connecting his office to the reception area. The sound was quiet, suppressed, like she was trying not to be heard, like she was hiding something, like she had secrets she was protecting from him. His jaw flexed. His hands tightened on the pen he'd been using to sign contracts, the expensive metal bending slightly under pressure that could snap lesser materials. For a week now, this pattern had repeated. Phone buzzing. Vivian checking it immediately. That small, private smile that never appeared when she was talking to him. The way she'd tuck the phone away quickly if he emerged from his office, like whatever she was reading wasn't something she wanted him to see. The way she'd started taking lunch at her desk instead of in the break room, phone in hand, responding to messages with the kind of focus she usually reserved for his most complex projects. Someone had her attention. Someone was making her smile. Someone was occupying the space in her thoughts that Jackson had convinced himself he didn't want but couldn't stop obsessing over. He pressed the intercom button on his desk, the small click feeling like a declaration of war. Vivian. Her chair scraped as she straightened instantly, the sound sharp enough to carry through the glass. Yes, Mr. Wolf. Step in, he said. The words clipped, controlled, carrying none of the possessive fury building in his chest. "Now, and bring your phone." The silence that followed lasted 3 seconds. Long enough for him to see her silhouette freeze. Long enough for him to imagine her internal calculation, compliance versus defiance, professional obligation versus personal privacy. Long enough for his jaw to tighten further as he waited to see which she'd choose. Then she stood, smoothing her skirt with one hand, picking up her phone with the other, and walked toward his office with the steady, professional stride that never quite hid the wariness in her posture when he summoned her like this. When his voice carried that particular edge that suggested someone was about to be held accountable for something. If you're still thinking about them, subscribe and become part of our story family. Your support is what keeps these emotional journeys alive. Comment where you're watching from. Let's share this experience together. She entered his sanctuary, the corner office that commanded views of the city from floor-to-ceiling windows, that held furniture worth more than most people's annual salaries, that projected power and control and the absolute authority of a man who'd built an empire on calculated decisions and strategic dominance. She closed the door behind her with a soft click that felt final, isolating them from the dozens of employees working beyond the glass walls. Vivian stood in front of his desk, the sleek black phone clutched in her right hand like a small shield, her left hand empty and slightly tense at her side. She wore a charcoal blazer over a wine-colored blouse that brought out the warmth in her brown eyes. A pencil skirt that was professional without being severe. Heels that added 3 inches to her height, but still left her significantly shorter than his 6'3" frame. Her dark brown hair was pulled back in a low bun, a few strands escaping to frame her face in ways that looked artfully casual but were probably just the result of a long day managing his schedule. She looked composed, professional, guarded in ways she'd become over 2 years of working for a man whose reputation preceded him everywhere he went. Jackson didn't blink, his eyes, dark and focused, fixed on the device in her hand with the intensity he usually reserved for hostile negotiations or threat assessments. "Put it on the desk. Unlock it. Now." The command was delivered in a voice low enough to avoid being heard through the glass, but carrying enough weight to make compliance feel inevitable. This was the voice that made grown men confess to betrayals, that extracted information without needing to raise volume, that communicated absolute expectation of obedience. Vivian's fingers tightened on the phone. Her throat moved in a swallow that suggested she was processing the enormity of what he was asking, the invasion of privacy, the overreach of authority, the crossing of boundaries that employment law said he had no right to cross. "Mr. Wolf," she said carefully, her voice steady despite the tension visible in her shoulders. "With respect, my phone is personal property. What I do on my personal time, on my personal device, isn't—" "Put it on the desk," Jackson interrupted, his voice dropping lower, harder. "Unlock it. Or we can discuss why you feel the need to protect whatever's on there from the man who signs your paychecks and trusts you with information that could destroy his organization if mishandled." The threat was implicit but clear. Refuse, and he'd assume the worst. Refuse, and she'd be admitting there was something worth hiding. Refuse, and whatever trust existed between them would shatter under the weight of his suspicion. Vivian's jaw tightened. For a moment, Jackson thought she'd refuse anyway, thought she'd choose privacy over her position, thought he'd be forced to watch her walk out of his office and possibly out of his life because he couldn't control the jealousy eating him alive. Then she stepped forward, placed the phone on his desk with deliberate care, and unlocked it with her thumbprint before stepping back, her arms crossing over her chest in a defensive posture that suggested she was bracing for judgment. "There," she said quietly. "Whatever you're looking for, I hope you find it worth violating my trust." Jackson picked up the phone, his thumb hovering over the screen, his expression cold despite the chaos of emotion roiling beneath his controlled exterior. He expected to find messages from a boyfriend, expected to discover the name of the man who'd been stealing her smiles all week, expected confirmation that Vivian Croft had a secret life that didn't include him, that she was planning to leave for someone who could offer her normal, instead of the dangerous proximity to a man whose business operated in shadows. What he found instead shattered every assumption he'd built, replaced possessive fury with something far more devastating, and transformed him from jealous boss to protective force. In the span of 3 seconds, it took his eyes to process what was actually on her screen. Not messages from a lover, but a nightmare that explained everything and changed absolutely everything between them forever. The first thing Jackson saw was the banking app, still open from her most recent check. The screen showed an account balance that made his chest tighten with something that had nothing to do with jealousy and everything to do with the brutal reality of what that number represented. Available balance: $847.23. That was all. $847. For a woman who worked for him full-time, who lived alone in a city where rent averaged $2,000 a month minimum, who dressed professionally every day and never missed work, and handled responsibilities that would overwhelm most people. $847. His eyes moved before his brain fully processed the implications, scanning the recent transactions that painted a picture he hadn't been prepared to see. Rent, $1,850. Utilities, $180. Grocery store purchases that never exceeded $30 at a time, suggesting someone buying only essentials, stretching every purchase to its limit. And then, repeatedly over the past 2 weeks, smaller transfers. $50 to someone named Mom Mobile, $100 to Dad Emergency Fund, $75 to hospital payment plan. Every spare dollar she had was being sent somewhere else. To someone else. Not to a boyfriend, to family, to a crisis he hadn't known existed. Jackson's jaw tightened as he swiped to her messages, the jealousy that had driven him to this invasion of privacy already transforming into something colder and more focused. The text thread at the top of her screen was labeled, Mom, and the preview text was enough to make his hands tighten on the phone. The doctors say we need to decide soon. Dad's condition is deteriorating faster than they expected. The surgery has to happen within the next week, or they can't guarantee. He tapped the thread, the full conversation loading with brutal efficiency. His eyes scanned messages that had been sent over the past week, the same week Vivian had been glued to her phone, the same week he'd been building elaborate fantasies about romantic rivals and planned departures. Mom, Monday, 9:47 a.m. Viv, the cardiologist called. Dad's heart is failing faster than they thought. They're recommending the surgery immediately instead of waiting, but the insurance company denied coverage. They're calling it experimental. We need $87,000 up front before they'll schedule it. Vivian, Monday, 9:52 a.m., $87,000. Mom, I don't have that. Not even close. Can we appeal the insurance decision? Mom, Monday, 10:15 a.m. The appeal process takes 30 to 45 days. He doesn't have that long, honey. The doctors were very clear. Without this surgery, we're looking at weeks, maybe a month. I'm trying to get a loan, but our credit is maxed from his previous treatments. I don't know what to do. Vivian, Monday, 11:23 a.m. I'll figure something out. Don't tell Dad yet. Let me see what I can do. The messages continued through the week, each one more desperate than the last. Vivian researching medical loans that she didn't qualify for. Her mother sending updates on her father's declining condition. Her brother Jackson hadn't even known she had a brother offering to drain his own savings, which would cover maybe $10,000 at most. Family members pooling resources that would still leave them $70,000 short of what they needed to save their father's life. And through it all, Vivian responding with calm efficiency despite the terror that must have been consuming her. Researching hospitals, calling insurance companies, making spreadsheets of payment options, trying to solve an impossible problem with the same focused competence she brought to managing his chaotic schedule. Except she'd been doing it alone, in silence, on her phone during breaks and lunch hours, and probably late into the night after she left his office, carrying a burden that was crushing her while maintaining the professional facade that made him think everything was fine. While he'd been obsessing over imaginary romantic rivals, she'd been watching her father die. Jackson's throat tightened. His thumb moved almost unconsciously, scrolling further through her messages, through threads with her siblings discussing their father's illness, through conversations with hospitals and insurance companies, through the digital evidence of a family in crisis that Vivian had been navigating completely alone. He found the thread with her best friend Sarah, messages that were more honest about her emotional state. Sarah, Wednesday, 10:34 p.m. Viv, you can't carry this alone. Have you told anyone at work? Your boss seems wealthy. Maybe. Vivian, Wednesday, 10:41 p.m. I can't ask Mr. Wolf for money. He's my employer, not my friend. It would be completely inappropriate. I'd rather quit and access my $401k early. It's only about $12,000, but it's something. Sarah, Wednesday, 10:45 p.m. Quitting means losing your health insurance too, and you'd pay massive penalties on early $401k withdrawal. Plus, you'd have no income. Viv, that's not a solution. Vivian, Wednesday, 11:02 p.m. It's the only solution I have. I can find another job eventually. I can't find another father. The words hit Jackson like physical blows. She was planning to quit, planning to destroy her own financial stability, sacrifice her career trajectory, Lose the position she'd worked so hard to excel in, all because asking for help felt more impossible than self-destruction. His hands were shaking now, a physical response he couldn't control as he navigated to her drafts folder, finding what he knew would be there based on Sarah's reference. The unsent resignation letter, dated for today, written with the same professional courtesy Vivian brought to everything. Dear Mr. Wolf, please accept this letter as my formal resignation from the position of executive assistant, effective immediately. I apologize for the short notice, but urgent family circumstances require my immediate attention and full-time commitment. I have prepared detailed transition documents covering all active projects, upcoming deadlines, and regular responsibilities. I will be available by phone to answer any questions during the transition period. Thank you for the opportunity to work with you over the past 2 years. I have valued the experience and learned more than I can adequately express. Respectfully, Vivian Croft, professional to the end. Courteous even while her world was collapsing, apologizing for the inconvenience of her father's imminent death, offering to help with the transition while planning to cash out her retirement savings to fund a surgery that would still leave her family $75,000 short. Jackson set the phone down carefully on his desk, his movements controlled despite the storm of emotion threatening to crack his legendary composure. His eyes lifted to find Vivian standing exactly where he'd left her, arms still crossed defensively, her face carefully blank except for the telltale tightness around her eyes that suggested she was bracing for whatever judgment he was about to deliver. She thought he'd found evidence of a boyfriend, thought she was about to be fired for inappropriate phone usage, or divided attention, or whatever excuse bosses gave when they wanted to eliminate employees for personal reasons. She had no idea he'd just discovered her worst nightmare laid bare in digital format, had no idea he'd just read every desperate message, every failed attempt to solve the impossible, every moment of terror she'd been hiding behind professional efficiency. How much do you need? Jackson asked, his voice quiet, controlled, carrying none of the jealousy that had driven him to this invasion, and all of the lethal focus he applied to problems that required immediate, decisive action. Vivian blinked, confusion replacing wariness. I'm sorry? For your father's surgery, Jackson clarified, his dark eyes locked on hers with intensity that made avoiding his gaze impossible. The cardiac procedure the insurance company denied. How much do you need? The color drained from her face. You read my messages? All of them, Jackson confirmed without apology. Banking app, text messages, the resignation letter you were planning to submit today. I know about your father's condition. I know about the experimental surgery. I know about the $87,000 you don't have. I know you were planning to quit your job and destroy your financial future trying to scrape together enough to save him. So I'm asking again, how much do you actually need? Not just for the surgery, but for everything. Follow-up care, rehabilitation, making sure your family doesn't go bankrupt while your father recovers. Vivian's mouth opened and closed without sound, her hands uncrossed, one moving to grip the back of the chair in front of her like she needed physical support to remain standing. Mr. Wolf, I can't, this isn't, you shouldn't have. How much? Jackson interrupted, standing now, moving around his desk with the predatory grace that made most people step back. Vivian held her ground, her chin lifting in defiance, even as her eyes filled with tears she was clearly fighting to suppress. Give me a number, total cost. Everything your family needs to get through this without losing their home or declaring bankruptcy or making impossible choices about which bills to pay. 150,000, Vivian whispered, the number seeming to be pulled from her against her will. Maybe more depending on how long the recovery takes. Rehabilitation can run another 30 to 50,000. Lost wages for my mom who'll have to take leave to care for him. Medical equipment for home care. The surgery itself is 87, but the rest, her voice cracked, the rest is everything that comes after. Everything they'll need to survive while he heals. If he heals. He'll heal, Jackson said with absolute certainty, the kind of confidence that came from years of making impossible things happen through sheer force of will and unlimited resources. Give me the name of the hospital, the surgeon, every detail you have about the procedure and the facility requirements. I'm handling this. You can't just... Vivian started. I can, Jackson interrupted, returning to his desk and pulling out his phone. Already dialing Marcus, his most trusted associate, the man who made problems disappear and impossible situations resolve themselves. I can and I am. Marcus, I need you to wire $150,000 to... He paused, looking at Vivian. What hospital? Mercy General, Vivian said numbly, seeming unable to process what was happening. unable to reconcile the jealous boss who'd demanded her phone 5 minutes ago with the man who was now casually discussing 6-figure wire transfers. "Mercy, General?" Jackson repeated into the phone. "Cardiac surgery department. Patient name is..." He glanced at Vivian again. "Robert Croft," she provided, her voice barely audible. "Robert Croft," Jackson continued. "I want the full amount available within the hour. Then I want you to contact the best cardiac surgeon in the region, not who's available, who's the actual best, and offer whatever compensation is necessary to have them consult on this case. I want second and third opinions from specialists. I want to know if this experimental procedure is actually cutting edge, or if there are better options the insurance company isn't telling them about. I want a full medical team assembled around this man's care." He listened briefly to Marcus's response, probably questions about why his boss was suddenly funding a stranger's medical emergency, then cut him off. "Because I said so. That's all the explanation you need. Make it happen. I want updates every 2 hours on progress." Jackson ended the call and turned his full attention back to Vivian, who was now openly crying, tears streaming down her face despite her obvious attempts to maintain composure. Her hand pressed against her mouth like she could physically hold back the emotion threatening to overwhelm her. "Why?" she asked, the word coming out broken. "Why would you do this? You barely know me. I'm just your assistant. I manage your calendar and filter your calls and organize your files. This is too much. I can't possibly repay." "You're not repaying anything," Jackson said firmly, moving toward her again, this time not stopping until he was close enough to reach out, his hands gripping her shoulders with surprising gentleness. "This isn't a loan. This isn't an advance against salary. This is me ensuring that the woman who runs my life doesn't lose her father because she was too proud to ask for help and I was too blind to notice she needed it." "I can't accept charity," Vivian protested, but her voice lacked conviction, crushed under the weight of desperate hope warring with ingrained independence. "It's not charity," Jackson corrected. "It's investment. I'm investing in keeping my executive assistant functional and focused instead of destroyed by grief and financial ruin. I'm investing in making sure you don't quit to cash out a retirement account that would barely cover a fraction of what you need. I'm investing in..." He stopped, the honesty that wanted to emerge feeling too raw, too exposed. "I'm investing in the woman I've been falling for while pretending it was just professional respect." "Mr. Wolf," Vivian said, and the title felt wrong now. Felt like distance when they'd just crossed every professional boundary that had existed between them. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll call your mother," Jackson said, releasing her shoulders but not stepping back, maintaining proximity that communicated something beyond professional concern. "Tell her the money is handled. Tell her to contact the hospital immediately and schedule the surgery as soon as the medical team says your father is stable enough. Tell her your family can focus on his recovery instead of financial survival. This changes everything," Vivian whispered, her eyes searching his face like she was seeing him for the first time. Seeing past the intimidating boss to the man underneath who'd just casually committed $150,000 to saving her father's life. "Yes," Jackson agreed quietly. "It does." And in an office overlooking a city that bowed to his empire, surrounded by glass walls that made privacy impossible and power undeniable, Jackson Wolf made a decision that had nothing to do with business, and everything to do with the woman standing in front of him with tears on her face and hope replacing the desperation that had defined her week. He was keeping her. Not as his assistant, though she'd continue in that role if she wanted it, but as something more, something that terrified him with its intensity but felt more right than anything he'd done in his entire carefully controlled life. She needed protection. Needed someone with resources who could eliminate problems before they destroyed her. Needed a partner who understood that sometimes solving crises required money and power and connections rather than just emotional support. And he needed her. Needed the competence and loyalty and quiet strength she'd demonstrated by carrying an impossible burden alone rather than burdening others. Needed the woman who'd been planning to sacrifice everything for family. Needed the person who'd somehow become essential to his existence, without either of them consciously choosing it. "Go call your mother," Jackson said, stepping back finally, giving her space to breathe, to process, to begin accepting that her crisis was solved and her world had just fundamentally changed. "Then take the rest of the day off. Be with your family. I'll handle everything here." Vivian nodded, collecting her phone from his desk with shaking hands, moving toward the door like she was navigating through fog. She paused with her hand on the handle, turning back to look at him with an expression that held gratitude and confusion, and something else, something that looked like the beginning of trust. "Thank you," she said simply. "I don't know how I'll ever..." "You don't need to," Jackson interrupted. "Just go. Be with your family. That's all I need from you right now." She left, closing the door softly behind her. Through the glass walls, Jackson watched her return to her desk, watched her pick up her personal phone with hands that still trembled, watched her dial a number and press the phone to her ear. He couldn't hear the conversation, but he saw her face transform, saw the moment she told her mother the impossible news, saw the tears intensify, saw her shoulders shake with sobs she'd been holding back for a week, and he felt something in his chest crack the careful control he'd maintained for 15 years, the emotional distance that had kept him safe and isolated and utterly alone. Watching Vivian cry with relief over something he'd solved with a single phone call. Seeing her pain transform into hope because he'd chosen to act instead of remaining willfully ignorant. Understanding that she'd been suffering while he'd been obsessing over imaginary threats. It changed something fundamental. He'd built an empire on control, on strategic decisions, on keeping emotions separate from business, on never allowing personal feelings to compromise professional judgment. But Vivian Croft had somehow slipped past every defense he'd constructed, had become essential without him noticing until jealousy had forced the recognition. And now that he'd seen her crisis, now that he'd chosen to act, now that he'd crossed every professional boundary to solve a problem that wasn't technically his responsibility, there was no going back. She was his now, to protect, to support, to build something with that went beyond boss and assistant, beyond professional respect, beyond the careful distance they'd both maintained. His phone rang, Marcus calling back with the confirmation that funds were being transferred, that specialists were being contacted, that impossible was becoming accomplished through the application of resources and influence. Jackson answered with half his attention, his eyes still fixed on Vivian through the glass, watching her navigate the most important conversation of her life while he mobilized his empire to save her father. And he understood, with absolute clarity, that he'd just committed to something far more binding than any business contract. He'd committed to her family, to building a future that included protecting the woman who'd become far more important than he'd ever intended to allow. The jealousy that had driven him to invade her privacy seemed laughably insignificant now. Possessive fury had transformed into protective determination. Suspicion had become certainty, not about romantic rivals, but about his own feelings that he'd been denying for months. If you're still thinking about them, subscribe and become part of our story family. Your support is what keeps these emotional journeys alive. Comment where you're watching from. Let's share this experience together. He wanted her. Not just professionally, not just as the competent assistant who made his chaotic life function, but as his, permanently. In ways that had nothing to do with employment contracts and everything to do with the way she'd looked at him when he'd promised to save her father, like he was a miracle she hadn't known to pray for. Outside his office, Vivian stood, gathering her belongings with the distracted movements of someone operating on autopilot, her phone still pressed to her ear, her face still wet with tears that were now relief instead of desperation. She glanced toward his office one final time before heading to the elevator. Their eyes met through the glass. She mouthed, "Thank you," with such profound gratitude it physically hurt to witness. Jackson nodded once, acknowledging her thanks while simultaneously communicating something more. A promise that this was just the beginning, that he would continue protecting her, that she'd never face crisis alone again, as long as he had breath and resources. The elevator doors closed, taking her away to her family, to the hospital where her father would soon receive care that would save his life. And Jackson remained in his office, surrounded by contracts and business documents that suddenly felt meaningless compared to what he'd just done. He'd spent 15 years building an empire. He'd leveraged power and influence and carefully calculated decisions to create wealth most people couldn't comprehend. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had ever felt as significant as the 5-minute conversation where he'd chosen to save the father of the woman he was in love with. The woman he'd been falling for while pretending it was just professional appreciation. The woman who'd become essential while he'd been too blind to recognize it. The woman who was his now. Whether she fully understood that yet or not, everything had changed. The professional boundaries they'd maintained were shattered. The careful distance was obliterated. The future they'd both assumed would remain strictly employer-employee had transformed into something neither had planned but both desperately needed. And Jackson Wolfe, who'd spent his entire adult life avoiding emotional entanglement, who'd built walls specifically to prevent this kind of vulnerability, found himself absolutely certain about one thing. He was keeping her, forever. Whatever it took. The office felt different after Vivian left. Jackson stood at his window, staring out at the city skyline without really seeing it, his mind replaying the past hour in fractured sequences that didn't quite feel real. He'd invaded her privacy, discovered her crisis, Committed $150,000 to solving a problem he'd learned about 10 minutes ago. Fundamentally altered their professional relationship in ways that couldn't be undone, and he didn't regret a single second of it. His phone buzzed Marcus, calling with updates that Jackson answered with half his attention, confirming wire transfers and specialist consultations, while his eyes remained fixed on the empty desk outside his office where Vivian usually sat, the physical absence feeling more significant than it should have. "The funds are available at Mercy General," Marcus reported with his usual efficiency. "I've also contacted Dr. Patricia Chen. She's the top cardiac surgeon on the West Coast, specializes in the exact procedure Robert Croft needs. She's willing to consult on the case for a $50,000 fee." "Should I proceed?" "Yes," Jackson said immediately. "Whatever she needs. I want the best possible care. I want every advantage medicine and money can provide." "Understood. I'll also arrange for a private recovery suite and dedicated nursing staff for post-operative care. Should reduce infection risk and improve recovery outcomes." "Do it," Jackson confirmed. "Keep me updated on every development. I want to know the moment surgery is scheduled, the moment it begins, the moment it's complete. Everything." He ended the call and returned to his desk, attempting to focus on the contracts that had seemed important this morning but now felt like meaningless busywork compared to the crisis he'd just intervened in. The words blurred together, his concentration fractured by images of Vivian's face, the shock, the tears, the desperate hope. When she'd realized he was serious about solving her impossible problem, she'd looked at him like he was a miracle, like he was something more than the demanding boss who'd spent 2 years pushing her to excellence while maintaining careful professional distance, like he was someone who mattered beyond the salary he provided and the authority he wielded. And something in Jackson had responded to that look with possessive certainty. She was his, had been his for longer than he'd admitted. The jealousy he'd felt wasn't about losing an efficient assistant, it was about losing the woman he'd been falling for while pretending his feelings were purely professional. His intercom buzzed his secretary's voice, the woman who managed the main reception area and would now need to handle Vivian's responsibilities until she returned. "Mr. Wolf, you have a 3 o'clock conference call with Chicago. Should I transfer it to your line?" Jackson glanced at his watch. 2:47 p.m., 13 minutes until a call he'd completely forgotten about, discussing territorial negotiations with associates who operated in legal gray areas that required his personal attention. Business that had seemed critical this morning but now felt like an interruption to what actually mattered. "Yes," he said curtly. "And hold all other calls until I indicate otherwise. No interruptions except emergencies." "Understood, sir." The call lasted 90 minutes, Jackson navigating complex negotiations with the same focused intensity he brought to all business matters, compartmentalizing his personal concerns with practiced efficiency. By the time it ended, evening had settled over the city, the office emptying as employees left for the day, the silence that remained feeling heavier than usual. Jackson's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. He opened it to find a message that made his chest tighten. "Unknown number 5. 23 p.m. This is Vivian's mother, Catherine Croft. Vivian gave me your number. I don't know how to thank you for what you've done. The hospital called they've scheduled Robert's surgery for tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. Dr. Chen herself will be performing it. They say his chances have improved dramatically with her involvement. I don't know what we did to deserve this blessing, but please know our family will be eternally grateful. May God bless you, Mr. Wolf." Jackson stared at the message, emotion tightening his throat in ways he wasn't accustomed to handling. He'd spent 15 years building an empire where gratitude usually came wrapped in fear or strategic obligation. Genuine thanks, the kind Catherine Croft had just offered, felt foreign, overwhelming, right in ways that had nothing to do with business advantage. He typed a response, deleting and rewriting it 3 times before settling on something that felt adequate. "Jackson, 5:31 p.m. Mrs. Croft, please focus on your husband's recovery. Everything else is handled. Vivian is an invaluable member of my team, and I'm honored to help her family during this difficult time. I'll be checking in tomorrow for updates on the surgery. Professional, appropriate, revealing nothing about the fact that his interest in Vivian's well-being had stopped being purely professional months ago. He saved Catherine's number in his contacts, then found himself opening a new message to Vivian herself. His thumb hovered over the keyboard, uncertain what to say. "How are you holding up? Too casual. Let me know if you need anything else. Too distant. I'm thinking about you. Too honest." Before he could settle on appropriate phrasing, his phone rang, Vivian calling, her name appearing on his screen like an answer to a question he hadn't known he was asking. "Vivian," Jackson answered immediately. "How's your father?" "Stable," she said, her voice thick with exhaustion and emotion. "They've got him on medications to support his heart function until the surgery tomorrow. Dr. Chen came by earlier, Mr. Wolf. She's extraordinary. She explained everything, answered all our questions, made us feel like Dad has a real chance. Because of you. Because of what you did. I'm glad she's giving you confidence," Jackson said, sidestepping the gratitude, uncomfortable with praise for something that had felt instinctive rather than calculated. "Are you staying at the hospital tonight?" "Yes, the whole family is here. We're taking shifts, so Dad's never alone." She paused. "I know I said it earlier, but I need to say it again. Thank you. What you did today, I don't have words adequate to express what it means. You saved his life, Mr. Wolf. You saved my father's life." The formality of Mr. Wolf felt wrong after everything they'd crossed. "Jackson," he corrected quietly. "When we're not discussing business, call me Jackson." Silence stretched between them, weighted with implications neither was ready to fully address. "Jackson," Vivian finally repeated, testing the name, the intimacy it suggested. "That feels strange." "It's accurate," Jackson said. "What happened today went beyond professional boundaries. We both know that. Pretending otherwise would be dishonest." "I don't know what we are now," Vivian admitted, her vulnerability cutting through the phone like a physical presence. "I don't know how to be your assistant after this. Don't know how to show up on Monday and maintain professional distance when you've seen my worst crisis and solved it like it was nothing. Don't know what you expect from me now." "I expect you to take care of your family," Jackson said firmly. "I expect you to be present for your father's surgery and recovery. I expect you to stop carrying burdens alone instead of asking for help. And when you're ready, when your father is stable and your family isn't in crisis, I expect you to come back to work. Because I still need you, Vivian. He paused, choosing honesty over safety. "Not just as my assistant anymore. Not after today." "Then what?" Vivian asked, and Jackson could hear the fear beneath the question. Fear of hoping. Fear of misunderstanding. Fear that the powerful boss who just saved her father might want payment that couldn't be calculated in currency. "Someone important to me," Jackson said quietly. "Someone I protect. Someone whose well-being matters beyond professional competence. We'll figure out the specifics when you're ready, when crisis isn't dictating our decisions. But Vivian, what we are now isn't what we were this morning. And I'm not pretending otherwise to make either of us comfortable." Another long silence. Then, Okay, Jackson. We'll figure it out. After tomorrow. After Dad's through surgery. After I can think clearly without terror overwhelming everything else." "Fair enough," Jackson agreed. "Call me after the surgery, regardless of the hour. I want to know the outcome immediately." "I will," Vivian promised. "And Jackson, thank you for everything. For reading my messages even though it was invasive. For solving the impossible. For being the answer to prayers I didn't think I was allowed to voice. I'll never forget what you did today." "Neither will I," Jackson said, the words carrying weight beyond simple agreement. They ended the call, but Jackson remained in his office long after darkness had fully claimed the city, staring at his phone, replaying their conversation, processing the fundamental shift that had occurred in less than 6 hours. This morning he'd been jealous, possessive in ways he had no right to be, convinced Vivian was being stolen by a romantic rival who didn't exist. Tonight he was committed, bound to her well-being in ways that went far beyond employer obligation, determined to prove that the protective instinct she'd triggered wasn't temporary crisis response but something permanent that he was choosing to build on. His empire had been built on control, on strategic decisions, on never allowing emotion to compromise judgment or create vulnerability that enemies could exploit. But Vivian had become the exception to every rule he'd established. The vulnerability he was choosing, the emotion he was allowing, the risk he was accepting because the alternative maintaining professional distance, pretending he didn't care beyond her competence, had become more impossible than admitting the truth. He was in love with his assistant, had been falling for months without acknowledging it, had let jealousy expose feelings he'd been denying. And now that the truth was unavoidable, now that he'd acted on protective instinct that went far beyond professional concern, now that she knew he'd move mountains to solve her crises, there was no retreating to what they'd been. They were something new, something undefined, something that terrified him with its intensity, but felt more right than 15 years of careful emotional isolation. Tomorrow her father would survive or he wouldn't. Tomorrow Jackson's intervention would prove sufficient or it wouldn't. Tomorrow they'd know if the future he'd just committed to was possible. or if tragedy would steal it before they had a chance to build it. But regardless of tomorrow's outcome, today had changed everything. And Jackson Wolf, who'd spent his entire adult life avoiding exactly this kind of emotional entanglement, found himself absolutely certain he'd made the right choice. He was keeping her, whatever that meant, whatever it cost. Forever. Jackson didn't sleep. He remained in his penthouse overlooking the city, pacing between windows that offered panoramic views he barely registered, checking his phone compulsively for updates that wouldn't come until morning, his mind caught in loops of scenarios he couldn't control. Robert Croft's surgery was scheduled for 6 a.m. Dr. Chen had estimated 4 to 6 hours of operating time depending on complications. Vivian would call after she'd promised. But the hours between now and then stretched like torture, each minute feeling longer than the last. At 3:47 a.m., Jackson gave up pretending he'd sleep. He showered, dressed in a charcoal suit that projected the authority he'd need for the business calls scheduled later, and made coffee he didn't want but drank anyway because routine felt like control when everything else was chaos. His phone remained silent. No updates from Marcus. No messages from Vivian. No news suggesting anything had gone wrong, but also no confirmation that everything was proceeding as planned. The uncertainty was unfamiliar. Jackson had built his empire specifically to eliminate uncertainty, to create control through resources and influence, to ensure outcomes could be directed through strategic application of power. But medicine didn't bow to influence. Surgery didn't care about resources. Robert Croft would survive or he wouldn't based on factors Jackson couldn't manipulate no matter how much money he threw at the problem. He hated it. Hated the helplessness. Hated knowing Vivian was at the hospital watching her father's life hang in balance, while Jackson could do nothing except wait for news and trust that the specialists he'd hired were as competent as their reputations suggested. At 6:03 a.m., his phone finally buzzed a text from Catherine Croft. Catherine, 6:03 a.m. They just took him back to surgery. Dr. Chen says everything looks good to proceed. She's confident. Vivian is holding up as well as can be expected. I'll update you when there's news. Thank you again for making this possible. Jackson responded immediately. Jackson, 6:04 a.m. Thank you for the update. Please tell Vivian I'm thinking of her and I'm available if she needs anything at all. He set the phone down and tried to focus on work contracts that needed review, calls that needed to be made, decisions that required his attention. But concentration remained fractured, his thoughts constantly circling back to Mercy General, to the operating room where Robert Croft's life was being saved or lost, to Vivian, who was probably pacing a waiting room with the same restless energy Jackson was channeling into pacing his penthouse. The morning crawled past with agonizing slowness. Marcus called at 8 to confirm all arrangements were proceeding smoothly. Business associates called with questions Jackson answered on autopilot. His secretary, the one temporarily covering Vivian's responsibilities, emailed his schedule with efficient competence that reminded him painfully of the woman who usually handled such tasks with effortless grace. At 10:37 a.m., Catherine texted again. Catherine, 10:37 a. Still in surgery. Dr. Chen's team sent out an update. Everything is proceeding well. No complications so far. They estimate another 2 hours. 2 more hours of waiting. 2 more hours of Vivian enduring this vigil. 2 more hours before Jackson would know if his intervention had been sufficient, or if despite everything, despite the specialists and the money and the resources, fate would take Robert Croft anyway. Jackson forced himself to attend a noon meeting with territorial associates, projecting his usual commanding presence while his phone sat on the conference table, volume up, waiting for the call that would change everything. At 1:14 p.m., his phone rang. Vivian's name on the screen. Jackson answered before the second ring, barely remembering to excuse himself from the meeting, stepping into the hallway where he could take the call privately. Vivian. He made it. Her voice broke on the words, tears audible beneath overwhelming relief. Jackson. He made it. Dr. Chen just came out. The surgery was successful. They repaired the damage. His heart is functioning properly. All vitals are stable. He's going to live. My father is going to live. The tension Jackson had been carrying for nearly 20 hours released all at once, his shoulders sagging against the wall, his eyes closing briefly against emotion that threatened to crack his controlled exterior. I'm so glad, Vivian. So incredibly glad. Because of you, Vivian said fiercely. Because you made this possible. Because you hired Dr. Chen and mobilized resources, and refused to let me carry this alone. My father is alive because you decided to help. I can't. Her voice dissolved into sobs. Vivian, breathe, Jackson said gently. You're in shock. You've been running on adrenaline for days. Let yourself feel the relief. Let yourself fall apart if you need to. You've earned it. I can't fall apart here, Vivian managed through tears. I have to. The family is everyone's here and I need to. Vivian, Jackson interrupted firmly. Your father is stable. Your family has good news to process. Give yourself 5 minutes to not be the strong one. 5 minutes to be human instead of the person holding everyone else together. Silence, except for her ragged breathing. Then, would you mind if I need to hear your voice? Need to talk to someone who isn't family. Someone who isn't expecting me to have answers or be strong or process this calmly. Can I talk to you for a few minutes? As long as you need, Jackson said immediately, abandoning any pretense of returning to his meeting, finding an empty office where he could close the door and give Vivian his complete attention. I'm here. Tell me what you're feeling. For the next 20 minutes, Vivian talked fractured sentences about the waiting room vigil, about watching her mother pray, about her siblings trying to stay positive, about the hours of not knowing if their father would survive. About the moment Dr. Chen had emerged with news that the surgery was successful, about the collective relief that had dropped the entire family to their knees, about looking around at her siblings and mother and realizing they were going to be okay. Jackson listened without interrupting, offering the steady presence she needed, the calm in her emotional storm. This was what she'd been carrying alone all week, this terror, this vigil, this impossible burden. And she'd done it while maintaining professional competence at work, while managing his chaotic schedule, while pretending everything was fine because asking for help felt more impossible than drowning alone. I'm sorry, Vivian said eventually, her voice steadier now. I didn't mean to fall apart on you. You have work. I shouldn't have. Stop, Jackson said firmly. Stop apologizing for being human. Stop apologizing for needing support. Stop acting like your crisis is an inconvenience to my schedule. Vivian, you matter. Your well-being matters. And I'm honored you called me when you needed someone to fall apart with. Honored, Vivian repeated, the word holding wonder. You're honored. Jackson, you just saved my father's life. You've given my family a future we thought was impossible. And you're saying you're honored I cried on the phone with you? Yes, Jackson said simply. Because it means you trust me. Trust that I'm not just your boss. Trust that what we are now goes beyond professional obligation. Trust that I meant what I said yesterday about you being important to me. Another long silence. Then, quietly, I do trust you. I don't know when it happened or how, but somewhere in the past 2 years you became someone I trust absolutely. She stopped, the admission hanging unfinished between them. Someone you what? Jackson prompted gently. Someone I care about. Vivian finished carefully. More than is probably appropriate for an assistant to care about her boss. More than I should admit when I'm emotionally vulnerable, and you've just done something extraordinary for my family. But it's true, Jackson. You're not just Mr. Wolf to me anymore. Haven't been for a while. I just didn't know how to acknowledge it without risking everything we'd built professionally. Jackson's chest tightened with emotion he'd spent 15 years suppressing. You're not just my assistant to me either. Haven't been since I don't even know when. Since you walked into your interview 2 years ago looking overqualified and determined. Since the first time you looked me in the eye and answered my deliberately intimidating questions without flinching. Since you proved you were competent and loyal and stronger than most men I employ. You matter to me, Vivian. Far more than professional competence can account for. What does that mean for us? Vivian asked. What do we do with these admissions? How do we navigate what comes next? Carefully, Jackson said. Honestly. One day at a time. You focus on your father's recovery. I'll give you whatever time you need. And when you're ready, when crisis isn't dictating our decisions, we'll figure out what we're building together. But Vivian, I need you to understand something. Yesterday changed us. Changed what we are. Changed what we can be. There's no going back to professional distance. No pretending this is just employer-employee concern. We crossed lines that can't be uncrossed, and I'm not sorry about it. Neither am I, Vivian admitted. Terrified about what it means, but not sorry. You've given me something I didn't know I needed: partnership. Someone who sees my burdens and insists on sharing them. Someone powerful enough to actually solve impossible problems. Someone who... She stopped again. Someone who cares about you, Jackson finished. Someone who wants to protect you. Someone who's choosing you, Vivian. Consciously. Deliberately. Permanently. Permanently, Vivian echoed. That's a big word, Jackson. A scary word. It's an accurate word, Jackson corrected. I don't make commitments lightly. Don't offer protection casually. Don't say things I don't mean. I'm choosing you, Vivian. Whatever that means. whatever it costs. However long it takes to build something real from what we've both been denying. Vivian's breath caught audibly. I need time. Need to process everything that's happened. Need my father to be stable and my family to be okay before I can think clearly about us. About what we might be. Take all the time you need, Jackson said. I'm not going anywhere. I'm not rescinding my protection. I'm not withdrawing my commitment just because you need time to process. I'm here, Vivian, permanently, waiting for you to be ready to build what we both know is inevitable. How can you be so certain? Vivian asked. Because I've spent 2 years trying to maintain professional distance, Jackson said bluntly. 2 years telling myself I valued you only for your competence. 2 years pretending the jealousy I felt when you smiled at your phone was about losing an efficient assistant. Yesterday shattered every lie I'd been telling myself. I'm in love with you, Vivian. Have been falling for months. Yesterday just forced me to admit it. Silence. Complete silence. Jackson could hear his own heartbeat, could feel adrenaline flooding his system despite years of training to suppress physical responses to emotional vulnerability. You're in love with me, Vivian finally said, the words barely a whisper. Jackson, you can't say something like that when I'm emotionally devastated and exhausted, and I can, Jackson interrupted. Because it's true. Because you deserve honesty. Because I'm done hiding behind professional boundaries. I love you, Vivian. I'm choosing you. And when you're ready, when you've had time to process and think, and make decisions from clarity rather than crisis, I'll be here, waiting, ready to build whatever you'll let me build with you. I don't know what to say, Vivian admitted. You don't have to say anything, Jackson assured her. You just have to know the truth. Know that what I did yesterday wasn't charity or professional obligation. It was love. It was protecting what's mine. It was refusing to let you suffer alone when I have the power to solve your crisis. I'm yours, Vivian said, testing the possessive claim. That's a dangerous thing to be, isn't it? Belonging to a man like you. It's the safest thing you could possibly be, Jackson corrected. Because I protect what's mine absolutely, ruthlessly, permanently. No one will touch you, Vivian. No crisis will destroy you. No burden will crush you, because you're mine now. And I take care of what belongs to me. Possessive, Vivian observed. But there was something in her voice, not fear, but wonder. Maybe hope. Absolutely, Jackson confirmed without apology. I'm a possessive man, Vivian. I hold what matters. I protect what I claim, and I'm claiming you, whether you're ready to accept that yet or not. You're overwhelming, Vivian said. I'm honest, Jackson corrected. I'm direct. I'm not playing games or hiding my intentions. You deserve to know exactly what I want and what I'm offering. You deserve time to decide if you want the same thing. But I'm not pretending my feelings are less intense than they are just to make this easier to process. I need to go, Vivian said. My family needs me. My father will be waking up soon, and I need to be there when he does. But Jackson, thank you. For everything. For the surgery. For the call. For the honesty. For loving me, even if I don't know how to respond to that yet. Go, Jackson said gently. Be with your family. Call me later if you want to talk. Or don't. I'll be here either way. Waiting. Committed. Yours. They ended the call. Jackson remained in the empty office, processing everything that had just been said, every boundary that had just been crossed, every truth that had just been voiced. He'd told her he loved her, had claimed her as his, had made promises about permanence and protection that couldn't be taken back, and instead of fear or rejection, she'd responded with careful wonder, with admission that she cared about him too, with acknowledgement that what they were building went beyond professional relationship. It wasn't acceptance, not yet. But it was possibility. It was the door opening on something neither had planned but both desperately needed. Jackson returned to his meeting, apologized for the interruption with a vague mention of personal business, and proceeded to navigate the rest of his day with practiced competence while his mind remained fixed on Vivian. She'd call again, when she was ready, when her father was stable, when crisis had subsided enough to allow space for building something new. And when she did, Jackson would be ready to prove his commitments weren't temporary crisis response, ready to show her that being his wasn't dangerous, it was the safest thing she could possibly be, ready to build the future he'd just claimed, forever. 3 days passed in a blur of hospital vigils and careful recovery. Robert Croft remained stable, improving steadily under Dr. Chen's care and the intensive nursing Jackson had arranged. Vivian split her time between the hospital and brief trips home to shower and change. running on minimal sleep and maximum adrenaline, her phone, her lifeline to both family updates and the outside world she'd temporarily abandoned. Jackson maintained careful distance, giving her space to focus on family while making his presence felt through practical support. He sent meals to the hospital for the entire Croft family, not hospital cafeteria food, but catered dishes from restaurants that understood quality mattered even in crisis. He arranged for a hotel suite near the hospital so Vivian's mother didn't have to drive home exhausted. He had Marcus handle coordination with the medical team, ensuring every question was answered and every need anticipated. But he didn't visit. Didn't insert himself into family time. Didn't demand attention or acknowledgement beyond the brief text updates Vivian sent throughout each day. Vivian Day 1, 4:37 p. Dad woke up. He's coherent, and the pain is managed. Dr. Chen says recovery is proceeding better than expected. Vivian Day 2, 11:22 a.m. They moved him out of ICU this morning. He's in a regular room now. Still weak, but improving. Thank you for the meals. My family keeps asking how they can repay you. Vivian Day 3, 2:15 p.m. Dr. Chen says he might be released by next week if progress continues. I can't believe how fast he's healing. Mom says it's a miracle. I say it's because you hired the best surgeon in the region. Each message made Jackson's chest tighten, with something he was still learning to identify, not just relief at Robert's recovery, but profound satisfaction at having solved Vivian's crisis, at having protected what was his, at having proven his commitments weren't empty words. On the fourth day, Vivian called instead of texting. Jackson answered immediately, abandoning a contract review that had barely held his attention anyway. Vivian, how's your father? Sitting up today, she said, and Jackson could hear the smile in her voice, the lightness that came from crisis transforming into recovery. Complaining about hospital food despite eating the gourmet meals you keep sending, asking when he can go home, being difficult in ways that mean he's actually feeling better. That's good, Jackson said. Difficult patients recover faster. Dr. Chen said the same thing. Vivian paused. Jackson, I need to talk to you. About everything. About what happens next. Would you be willing to meet me? Not at the office. Somewhere neutral. Somewhere we can talk without professional pressure. Name the time and place, Jackson said immediately. I'll be there. There's a coffee shop 3 blocks from my apartment. The Copper Bean. Tomorrow at 10? I know it's Saturday, but... I'll be there, Jackson interrupted. 10 a.m. The Copper Bean. I'll find it. Thank you, Vivian said. For everything. For giving me space this week. For supporting my family from a distance. For not demanding acknowledgement or gratitude or anything. You've been... She stopped, searching for words. I've been yours. Jackson finished quietly. That's what you do for people who matter. You give them what they need even when it's not what you want. What did you want? Vivian asked. To be there, Jackson admitted. To see you. To hold you while you processed relief and exhaustion. To be physically present instead of just sending support from a distance. But you needed family time. Needed to focus on your father without navigating us. So I gave you space even though it was hard. Even though I wanted to be there. Because what you needed mattered more than what I wanted. That's... Vivian's voice caught. That's love, isn't it? Putting someone else's needs above your own wants. Being patient when you want to be present. Giving space when you want proximity. Yes, Jackson said simply. That's exactly what it is. I'll see you tomorrow, Vivian said. 10 a.m. We'll talk. About everything. About what we are and what we might become and how we navigate what comes next. I'll be there, Jackson confirmed. The next morning arrived with the weight of significant decisions. Jackson dressed carefully, not the intimidating suits he wore to command boardrooms, but dark jeans and a gray Henley that suggested casual without being unprofessional. He arrived at the Copper Bean 15 minutes early, claiming a corner table that offered privacy while maintaining visibility, ordering black coffee he didn't drink while he waited. Vivian appeared at 9:58, 2 minutes early, wearing jeans and a soft burgundy sweater that made her look younger, less guarded, more like the woman beneath the professional competence. Her hair was down instead of up, falling in loose waves around her shoulders. She looked tired but lighter, like the weight she'd been carrying had been partially lifted. She spotted him immediately, her steps faltering briefly before she closed the distance, sliding into the chair across from him with careful grace. Hi, Jackson echoed. You look exhausted. I am exhausted, Vivian admitted. But it's relief exhaustion instead of terror exhaustion. Huge difference. I might actually sleep tonight. You should, Jackson said. Your father's stable. The crisis is managed. You've earned rest. Vivian wrapped her hands around the coffee mug she'd ordered, not drinking, just holding it like an anchor. I need to say something before we discuss anything else. Something I've been practicing all morning but still don't have adequate words for. Say it however it comes, Jackson encouraged. You saved my father's life, Vivian said, her eyes meeting his directly, holding his gaze with intensity that made looking away impossible. You saw my crisis, and you solved it without hesitation, without demands, without making me feel small or desperate, or like I owed you something beyond gratitude. You were everything I didn't know I needed, and I love you for it. The words hit Jackson like physical impact, emotion flooding through careful control. Say that again. I love you, Vivian repeated, stronger this time. I don't know when it started. Maybe the day you hired me. Maybe the first time you looked at me like I was competent instead of decorative. Maybe gradually over 2 years of working beside you. But it's true. I love you, Jackson Wolf. And I'm terrified of what that means, but I'm done denying it. You love me, Jackson said, needing to hear it again. Needing confirmation this wasn't shock or gratitude disguised as emotion. I love you, Vivian confirmed. Not because you saved my father, though that matters enormously. Not because you're powerful or wealthy or capable of solving impossible problems, though that's attractive, but because of who you are underneath all of that. Because you're honest and direct and you don't play games. Because you saw me suffering and you refused to let me carry it alone. Because you chose me when you didn't have to. Because you're the safest thing I've ever known despite being dangerous to everyone else. Jackson reached across the table, his hand covering hers. The contact electric despite its simplicity. I meant what I said on the phone. I love you. I'm choosing you. Permanently. Whatever we build from here, it's built on that foundation, love and choice and commitment. I want that, Vivian said quietly. Want to build something with you. Want to figure out how we navigate professional boundaries when we're also navigating personal relationship. Want to see what we become when crisis isn't dictating our decisions. Then we start now, Jackson said. We start building, carefully, honestly, with communication instead of assumptions, with patience instead of rushing, with commitment to making this work instead of looking for reasons it can't. I need some parameters, Vivian said. Need to understand what you're offering and what you expect. Because Jackson, you're a powerful man. You operate in worlds I don't fully understand. Your empire is built on things I'm deliberately ignorant about. Dating you means accepting proximity to danger I've never navigated. It also means protection from that danger, Jackson countered. Means no one touches you. Means my enemies become irrelevant to your safety because harming you means starting a war they can't win. Means you're the most protected woman in the city precisely because you're mine. Possessive, Vivian observed, echoing her previous comment. Absolutely, Jackson confirmed without apology. I told you I'm a possessive man. I hold what matters, and you matter more than anything I've ever built. So yes, Vivian, I'm possessive of you, protective in ways that might feel overwhelming, determined to ensure your safety and well-being above everything else, including my own. That's what being mine means. That's what I'm offering. And what do you expect from me? Vivian asked. Honesty, Jackson said immediately. No more carrying burdens alone. No more hiding crises until they're catastrophic. No more pretending you're fine when you're drowning. I expect you to trust me with your vulnerabilities. To let me help when you're struggling. To believe that asking for support isn't weakness, it's partnership. That's hard for me, Vivian admitted. I've been independent for so long. Been the person everyone else depends on. Been the strong one who solves problems instead of creating them. Asking for help feels like failure. It's not failure, Jackson said firmly. It's trust. It's recognizing that partnership means sharing burdens instead of carrying them alone. It's understanding that I have resources specifically to make your life easier. Let me use them, Vivian. Let me protect you and provide for you and solve problems before they destroy you. That's what I do for people I love. That's what I'm committing to. What about work? Vivian asked. What about professional boundaries? How do we navigate being together personally while maintaining employer-employee relationship professionally? We establish clear boundaries, Jackson said. At work, you're my assistant. I'm your boss. We maintain professional conduct. But after hours outside the office, we're equals building a relationship. We date. We spend time together. We build intimacy and trust and partnership. The roles don't conflict if we're clear about which context we're operating in. And if they do conflict, Vivian pressed. If something happens where professional and personal intersect uncomfortably, then we communicate, Jackson said. We talk about it. We find solutions. We prioritize honesty over comfort. But Vivian, I won't use my position as your boss to pressure you personally. Won't conflate professional authority with personal relationship. Won't make you choose between your career and being with me. Those are firewalls I'm committed to maintaining. You've thought about this, Vivian observed. I've thought about nothing else for 4 days, Jackson admitted. Thought about every way this could go wrong and how to prevent it. Thought about what you'd need to feel safe building something with me. Thought about how to love you without overwhelming you. You matter too much to approach this carelessly. Vivian's eyes glistened with tears. She blinked back. I'm not used to mattering to powerful men. My experience has been that men like you take what they want without consideration for what women need. That power equals entitlement. That wealth means never hearing no. I'm not those men, Jackson said quietly. I'm not taking what you're not ready to give. I'm not demanding more than you're comfortable offering. I'm not using power to coerce or manipulate or pressure. I'm asking you to build something with me. Voluntarily, consciously, with full agency to set boundaries and limits and pace. You're not something I'm taking, Vivian. You're someone I'm choosing. There's a huge difference. There is, Vivian agreed softly. Thank you for understanding that, for not assuming your feelings entitle you to mine, for being patient while I process everything that's happened. So where does that leave us? Jackson asked. Dating, Vivian said, testing the word. Carefully, deliberately. Building something real instead of just reacting to crisis. You take me to dinner. We spend time together outside work. We learn each other in contexts that aren't professional. We see if what we feel in crisis translates to something sustainable and calm. I can do that, Jackson said. Dinner tonight? Tonight, Vivian confirmed. Somewhere nice but not ostentatious. Somewhere we can talk without feeling like we're on display. Somewhere that feels like us instead of just expensive. I know a place, Jackson said. Italian restaurant I own. Private dining room. Excellent food. Complete discretion. I'll pick you up at 7. You own a restaurant, Vivian said, something between amusement and exasperation in her voice. I own several, Jackson corrected. Real estate portfolio includes multiple dining establishments. This particular one has a private room I use for sensitive business meetings. It'll work perfectly for a first date that needs privacy. First date in a private room at a restaurant you own, Vivian repeated. This is what dating a mafia boss looks like, isn't it? Yes, Jackson said without apology. Dating me means access to resources most people don't have. Private rooms, excellent security, discretion, protection. If that makes you uncomfortable, it doesn't, Vivian interrupted. It's just different. Different from anything I've experienced. But not bad, just powerful, like you. You'll get used to it, Jackson said. And Vivian, if anything ever makes you uncomfortable, the wealth, the protection, the resources tell me, I'll adjust. What matters is that you're comfortable, not that I'm impressive. You're already impressive, Vivian said. You saved my father's life. You're loving me patiently. You're committing to building something real instead of just taking what you want. That's more impressive than all your resources combined. They talked for another hour, mapping boundaries and expectations, establishing ground rules for how they'd navigate professional and personal intersection. By the time they left the Copper Bean, they'd built a framework imperfect, but workable, a foundation they could build on. Jackson walked Vivian to her car, hyper-aware of proximity he'd denied himself all week. At her vehicle, she turned to face him, her hand reaching for his, fingers intertwining naturally. Thank you, she said quietly, for patience, for honesty, for being exactly what I needed even when I didn't know I needed it, for proving that powerful men can be safe, for loving me. Thank you for trusting me, Jackson countered, for being brave enough to acknowledge your feelings, for choosing to build something with me despite every reason fear would give you to run, for being worth every moment I've spent falling for you. Tonight, Vivian said. 7 p.m., first date, beginning of whatever we're building. Beginning of forever, Jackson corrected quietly. Vivian smiled, the first genuine, unguarded smile he'd seen from her in days. Forever's a big word. It's an accurate word, Jackson said. I don't make commitments lightly. When I say forever, I mean it. You're mine now, Vivian. Permanently. Get used to it. Possessive, she said again. but this time it sounded like affection rather than observation. Absolutely, Jackson confirmed. He leaned down, giving her time to pull away, to establish a boundary if she needed it. When she didn't retreat, he kissed her soft, careful, communicating promise rather than demand. When they broke apart, both breathless, Vivian's eyes held wonder. Wow, Jackson agreed. I should go, Vivian said, not moving. Should go home and rest and prepare for tonight. But I don't want to leave, don't want to stop being near you. Then don't, Jackson said. Come to my place. Rest there. We'll order food. You can sleep if you need to. We'll just be together. No pressure, no expectations, just proximity. That sounds perfect, Vivian admitted. Except I need to visit my father this afternoon. Check on his progress. Make sure Mom's holding up. I'll drive you, Jackson offered. I'd like to meet your father, if you're comfortable with that. You want to meet my father? Vivian said slowly. The father whose life you saved. That's significant, Jackson. That's meeting the family. That's making this real in ways that go beyond just us. It is real, Jackson said firmly. We're real. What we're building is real. And yes, I want to meet your family. Want them to know who I am beyond the man who paid for surgery. Want your father to see that his daughter is protected, that she's chosen someone worthy of her. You're overwhelming again, Vivian said, but she was smiling. But yes, I want you to meet my father. Want my family to know you. Want them to see what I see. That you're not just powerful and dangerous. That you're good. That you love me. That I'm safe with you. Then let's go, Jackson said. Together, building this. Making it real. They drove to Mercy General in Jackson's car, Vivian's hand in his, radio playing quietly while they navigated through the city toward the hospital where everything had changed 4 days ago. Toward the family Jackson had saved, toward the future they were building together. And in the comfortable silence between them, Jackson felt something he'd never experienced in 15 years of controlling his empire: absolute certainty. Not about business outcomes or strategic decisions, but about love, about choosing Vivian, about building something permanent with the woman who'd become more important than any power he'd accumulated. She was his. He was hers. Forever was just beginning. The drive to Mercy General took 20 minutes through Saturday afternoon traffic, Jackson navigating with one hand on the wheel and the other holding Vivian's, her fingers threaded through his in a grip that communicated both comfort and nervousness. She'd been quiet since they left the coffee shop, her gaze fixed on the city passing outside the window, her thumb occasionally stroking across his knuckles in absent patterns that suggested she was processing more than she was saying. "You're nervous," Jackson observed as they pulled into the hospital parking structure. "I'm terrified," Vivian corrected honestly. "Not of you meeting my family, I want that, but of what it represents. You meeting my father means this is serious, means we're not just dating casually, means I'm introducing you as what? My boyfriend? Yours," Jackson interrupted gently, parking in a spot near the elevators. He turned to face her fully, his hand moving to cup her cheek with surprising tenderness. "Introduce me however feels right, as your friend, your boyfriend, the man who helped with medical expenses, the man you're building something with. Whatever feels honest without being more than you're ready to claim." "What do you want me to introduce you as?" Vivian asked. "The man who loves you," Jackson said without hesitation. "The man who's committed to you permanently. The man who will protect you and your family for the rest of my life. But I understand if that's too much too soon. I understand if you need time before making declarations that's significant to your family." "You're not too much," Vivian said quietly. "You're overwhelming and intense, and you say things that should sound crazy but somehow feel exactly right. And she paused, gathering courage. "I want them to know you're mine. Want my father to understand you're not just a generous stranger. Want my family to see that I've chosen you the way you've chosen me. Then that's what we tell them," Jackson said simply. They entered the hospital through automatic doors that whispered open, navigating familiar hallways toward the cardiac recovery wing where Robert Croft had been moved from ICU. Vivian's grip on Jackson's hand tightened as they approached room 412, her steps slowing slightly as nervous energy overtook her careful composure. "Hey," Jackson said softly, stopping her just outside the room. "If you're not ready for this, we can wait. We can build to family introductions gradually, instead of all at once." "I'm ready," Vivian said firmly. "I'm nervous, but I'm ready. My family has been asking about you all week, asking how they can thank you. Wanting to meet the man who saved Dad's life. This is important. To them and to me." She pushed open the door, entering ahead of Jackson into a private room that held evidence of family vigil flowers on every surface, cards taped to walls, comfortable chairs pulled close to the hospital bed where Robert Croft sat propped up against pillows, looking thin and pale but undeniably alive. Catherine Croft sat beside her husband, her hand in his, her face transforming when she saw Vivian. "Sweetheart, we weren't expecting you until later." Then her eyes moved past Vivian to Jackson, recognition dawning instantly. "Mr. Wolfe. Oh my Robert, it's Mr. Wolfe, the man who—" "Mom, breathe," Vivian said quickly, moving to her mother's side. "I brought Jackson to meet Dad. If that's okay. If you're up for visitors." Up for Catherine stood abruptly, moving toward Jackson with purpose, her eyes filling with tears. "Mr. Wolfe, there are no words adequate for what you've done for our family. You saved my husband's life. You've given us a future we thought was impossible. How do you thank someone for that? How do you express gratitude that profound?" "You don't need to," Jackson said gently, his usual commanding presence softened in the face of Catherine's overwhelming emotion. "I'm honored I could help. Honored to know your family. Honored that Vivian trusts me enough to bring me here." "Vivian hasn't stopped talking about you," Catherine said, her voice breaking. "About how kind you've been, how supportive, how you've handled everything with such grace and generosity. Catherine glanced at her daughter with a knowing smile. "She's clearly smitten. And after meeting you, I understand why." "Mom," Vivian protested, color rising in her cheeks. "What?" Catherine said innocently. "I'm just stating the obvious. You've been different this week. Lighter, hopeful. That's because of him, isn't it?" "Yes," Vivian admitted quietly, her hand finding Jackson's again. "It is. Jackson is. He's important to me. Very important. We're together, building something, and I wanted you to meet him not just as the man who paid for Dad's surgery, but as the man I'm choosing to be with." Catherine's expression transformed from grateful to delighted. "Together. Oh, sweetheart. That's wonderful. Robert, did you hear that? Our Vivian has found someone." From the bed, Robert Croft cleared his throat, a sound that was weak but determined. "Found someone who can apparently work miracles. Come here, young man. Let me see the face of my guardian angel." Jackson approached the bed, conscious of Catherine and Vivian watching, aware that this moment held weight beyond simple introduction. Robert Croft studied him with the assessing gaze of a father evaluating the man interested in his daughter, his eyes sharp despite physical weakness. "Mr. Croft," Jackson said respectfully. "It's an honor to meet you, sir. Vivian speaks of you often and with great love." "She speaks of you too," Robert said, his voice raspy but growing stronger. "Though she's been cryptic about the details. Says you're her boss, but that doesn't explain why her boss would pay $150,000 for a stranger's medical care. So I'll ask directly, what are your intentions toward my daughter?" "Robert," Catherine said, half exasperated, half amused, "you can't interrogate the man who saved your life." "I can and I will," Robert said firmly. "Money doesn't buy permission to court my daughter. I need to know who she's choosing. What kind of man he is beyond his bank account." "Fair enough," Jackson said, respecting the father's protective instinct. He pulled a chair closer to the bed, sitting so he was eye level with Robert, giving the man the respect of direct engagement. "My intentions are to love your daughter, sir, to protect her, to build a life with her that honors both her independence and my protective nature, to be the partner she deserves, someone who sees her strength and supports it rather than trying to diminish it." "Pretty words," Robert observed, "but what do they mean in practice? What does love look like when it comes from a man wealthy and powerful enough to solve impossible problems with a phone call?" "It looks like respecting her boundaries even when I want to push past them," Jackson said honestly. "It looks like giving her space when she needs it even though I want to be present. It looks like supporting her family not as leverage but as gift. It looks like building a relationship based on choice rather than obligation or gratitude. Your daughter matters to me, Mr. Croft. Not because she's competent, though she is. Not because she's beautiful, though she is. But because she's strong and honest and brave enough to carry impossible burdens alone, rather than making them someone else's problem. I love her for who she is, not for what she can provide me." Robert was quiet for a long moment, his eyes moving between Jackson and Vivian, reading dynamics and truth in ways only fathers could. "She loves you too. I can see it. The way she's standing closer to you than necessary. The way she's watching you talk to me like my opinion matters enormously. The way she's ready to defend you if I push too hard. That's my girl, loyal to what she chooses. I'm aware of how fortunate I am, Jackson said. Aware that she's choosing me despite every reason that choosing a man like me is complicated. I don't take that choice lightly. What does a man like you mean? Robert asked directly. Vivian's been deliberately vague about your business. Says you operate in complicated spaces. That's code for something, isn't it? Jackson glanced at Vivian, reading permission in her slight nod. It means I built my empire in spaces that exist between legal and illegal, sir. I don't break laws flagrantly, but I operate in gray areas that require careful navigation. I have enemies. I maintain power through strategic relationships and calculated decisions. Dating me means proximity to a world most people never see and wouldn't want to. Dangerous, Robert said flatly. Potentially, Jackson agreed, but also protective. My enemies are irrelevant to Vivian's safety because harming her means starting a war they can't win. She's safer with me than she would be with someone ordinary, precisely because I have resources to eliminate threats before they materialize. You're asking me to trust my daughter's safety to a man who operates in dangerous worlds, Robert said. I'm promising you that I'll protect her with everything I am, Jackson corrected. That she matters more than my empire. That I'll choose her safety over my business interests every time. That loving her means shielding her from the complicated parts of my world while giving her access to the benefits. She's not collateral damage, Mr. Croft. She's the most important thing I've ever committed to protecting. Robert studied him for another long moment, then extended his hand, shaking despite medical equipment and physical weakness. Then welcome to the family, son. Love her well, protect her fiercely, and understand that if you hurt her, I'll find a way to haunt you from beyond the grave. Jackson shook the offered hand carefully, mindful of Robert's fragility. You won't need to haunt me, sir. Hurting her would destroy me worse than anything you could do. Good answer, Robert said, settling back against his pillows with visible exhaustion. Catherine, I like him. He's got Vivian's fire. They'll be good for each other. I liked him the moment he answered my first text, Catherine said warmly. Anyone who responds to a stranger's gratitude with that much grace is someone worth knowing. They stayed for an hour, conversation flowing easily as Vivian's siblings arrived. Her brother Marcus, which explained why Jackson's associate shared the name. Her younger sister Elena, both of them curious and protective and ultimately approving once they saw how Jackson treated their sister. By the time they left, Jackson had been thoroughly interrogated, cautiously accepted, and tentatively welcomed into a family that had every reason to be grateful, but was choosing trust based on observation rather than obligation. In the elevator returning to the parking structure, Vivian leaned against Jackson with exhausted relief. That went better than I expected. I thought Dad would be more difficult. He was appropriately protective, Jackson said. I would have been concerned if he hadn't questioned my intentions. His caution proves he loves you. He does love me, Vivian agreed. And now he knows I love you. That's significant. That's making this real in ways that go beyond just us. Do you regret it? Jackson asked. Regret introducing me as more than just the man who paid for surgery? No, Vivian said firmly. I don't regret it. I'm glad they know. Glad they understand you're not just generous stranger, but someone who matters to me. Someone I'm building a future with. A future, Jackson repeated, pulling her closer. I like the sound of that. So do I, Vivian admitted. So do I. They drove back to Jackson's penthouse in comfortable silence, Vivian's exhaustion finally catching up to her after a week of hospital vigils and emotional intensity. By the time they arrived, she was barely conscious, her head resting against the window, her breathing steady and deep. Jackson carried her from the car to his penthouse. She barely stirred, murmuring something incoherent before settling against his chest with complete trust. He placed her on his bed the first time she'd been in his private space, and covered her with a blanket before retreating to his office to give her the rest she desperately needed. She slept for 3 hours. When she woke, Jackson was in the kitchen, preparing food, pasta, and salad. Nothing elaborate, but better than takeout. Vivian appeared in the doorway wearing one of his shirts she'd apparently found, looking rumpled and soft and completely at home in his space. Hi, she said quietly. Hi, Jackson echoed. How do you feel? Better, Vivian admitted. Sorry for passing out on you. I didn't mean to. Don't apologize for needing rest, Jackson interrupted. You've been running on empty all week. Your body caught up. That's healthy, not something to apologize for. I'm wearing your shirt, Vivian observed, as if just realizing. You are, Jackson confirmed. It looks better on you than it ever did on me. Smooth, Vivian said, but she was smiling. She moved into the kitchen, accepting the plate he offered, settling at his breakfast bar with casual ease. This is nice. Being here. Being with you. It feels right, Jackson finished. Yes, Vivian agreed. Right. Like something I've been moving toward without knowing it. Like coming home to somewhere I didn't know existed. That's exactly what it is, Jackson said. Welcome home, Vivian. They ate together, conversation flowing easily, covering everything and nothing, her family's reactions, his business dealings that he was gradually making legitimate, their shared uncertainty about how to navigate what they were building. By the time they finished eating, comfortable domesticity had settled between them, easy and natural and right. I should go home, Vivian said eventually, though she made no move to leave. Should let you have your space. Shouldn't assume I can just colonize your penthouse. Stay, Jackson said immediately. Stay here tonight. We'll order movies. We'll be lazy together. We'll build this foundation of just being. No pressure, no expectations. Just proximity and trust and learning each other outside of crisis. That sounds perfect, Vivian admitted. But Jackson, we haven't talked about physical boundaries. About what you expect or what I'm comfortable with, or we take it slow, Jackson interrupted gently. We build trust before we build physical intimacy. We communicate instead of assuming. And Vivian, I'm not expecting anything from you beyond your presence. If all we do tonight is watch movies and fall asleep on the couch, that's perfect. This isn't about physical progression, it's about emotional foundation. You're patient, Vivian observed. I'm committed, Jackson corrected. Patient is something you are when you're waiting for something temporary. Committed is what you are when you're building something permanent. I'm committed to getting this right with you. That means patience. That means respecting your pace. That means building trust before anything else. I'm not used to men like you, Vivian said quietly. Men who have power but don't wield it as weapon. Men who want me but don't demand access. Men who are willing to wait. It's extraordinary. You're worth waiting for, Jackson said simply. Worth building trust with. Worth getting right instead of rushing and ruining. I've waited 37 years to find someone who matters this much. I can wait however long you need to feel safe building something with me. Vivian's eyes filled with tears. She blinked back. I love you. I know I already said it today, but I need to say it again. I love you, Jackson Wolf, for your patience and your honesty and your willingness to let me set the pace, for being exactly what I needed without knowing I needed it. I love you too, Jackson said. For your strength and your vulnerability and your trust, for choosing me despite every complication, for being brave enough to build something real. They spent the evening exactly as Jackson had described, movies neither paid much attention to, comfortable silence punctuated by easy conversation, physical proximity that was intimate without being sexual. And when Vivian fell asleep against his shoulder near midnight, Jackson carried her to his bed again, this time joining her above the covers, maintaining physical separation while offering presence. This was love, he realized. Not grand gestures or expensive gifts or solving crises with money, but quiet moments, steady presence, patient building of trust and foundation. This was what he'd been missing for 37 years. This was home, and he was keeping it. Forever. Sunday morning arrived with soft light filtering through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating Jackson's bedroom in ways that made Vivian look almost ethereal, her hair spread across his pillow, her face relaxed in genuine rest, one hand curled near her face like a child. Jackson watched her sleep for longer than was probably appropriate, memorizing details he'd never had opportunity to observe: the small scar above her left eyebrow, the way her breathing deepened when she was truly at peace, the trust evident in her complete vulnerability. She woke slowly, her eyes opening gradually, confusion giving way to recognition, and then soft wonder as she realized where she was. Morning, Jackson said quietly. How did you sleep? Better than I have in months, Vivian admitted. Maybe years. I feel, she paused, searching for words. Safe. Completely. Absolutely safe. That's because of you. Good, Jackson said simply. That's exactly how you should feel. His phone buzzed on the nightstand, a text from Marcus, with updates on Robert Croft's continued improvement. Jackson read it aloud. Your father had a good night. Vitals are stable. Dr. Chen is optimistic about discharge by midweek if progress continues. Vivian's face transformed with relief. Midweek. That's so much faster than we expected. Mom must be thrilled. She texted me too, Jackson said, showing Vivian his phone where Catherine's message expressed gratitude and excitement about Robert's rapid recovery. Your family is healing, Vivian. The crisis is truly over. Because of you, Vivian said, the now familiar refrain carrying less desperation and more settled gratitude. Because you chose to help when you didn't have to. I had to, Jackson corrected. Once I knew about your crisis, doing nothing wasn't an option. Helping wasn't charity, it was necessity. It was protecting what's mine. Possessive, Vivian said, the word now completely affectionate. Absolutely, Jackson confirmed, pulling her closer, his arms wrapping around her with gentle security. You're mine, Vivian. I protect what's mine. Always. They spent Sunday in lazy domesticity, breakfast. Jackson cooked with surprising competence, comfortable silence, while they read in his living room. Easy conversation about nothing important. Vivian borrowed more of his clothes, looking impossibly attractive in oversized shirts and borrowed sweatpants. They existed together without agenda or pressure, building foundation through simple proximity. Monday arrived with the weight of returning to normal life. Vivian had taken the week off to be with her family, but Jackson had business obligations that couldn't be delayed further. He left her sleeping in his bed, pressing a kiss to her forehead before heading to his office where professional responsibilities waited with the patient's problems never actually had. His temporary secretary had managed adequately, but the difference between adequate and Vivian's excellence was stark. Contracts were filed correctly, but not prioritized efficiently. Calendar appointments existed, but lacked the contextual notes Vivian always provided. Phone calls had been handled, but without the screening that kept time wasters from reaching him. Jackson found himself missing Vivian professionally, even as he was building personal relationship with her. The realization was oddly comforting confirmation that his feelings weren't just romantic attraction, but genuine appreciation for every aspect of who she was. Throughout the day, they texted brief exchanges that kept them connected despite physical distance. Vivian 10:23 a.m. Visiting Dad this morning. He's asking when he gets to properly interrogate you without medical equipment attached. Jackson 10:31 a.m. Anytime he wants. I'm not afraid of protective fathers. Vivian 2:47 p.m. Doctor. Chen confirmed discharge Wednesday. Mom is preparing the house. Family is coordinating care shifts. It's really happening, he's coming home. Jackson 2:53 p. That's incredible news. Let me know if your family needs anything for home care setup. I can arrange equipment, nursing support, whatever makes recovery easier. Vivian 3:15 p.m. You've already done so much. We can't keep accepting. Jackson 3:16 p. Yes, you can. You're mine. Your family is mine. Let me help. Please. Vivian 3:24 p.m. Okay. Thank you. For everything, for being patient, for loving me. For making impossible possible. Jackson 3:31 p.m. Come back to the penthouse tonight, I miss you. Vivian 4:2 p. I miss you too. I'll be there by 7. She arrived at 6:47. Letting herself in with the key card Jackson had given her that morning, a gesture that held significance beyond simple convenience. Giving her access to his space meant trusting her with privacy, with vulnerability, with the sanctuary he'd carefully guarded for years. Vivian understood the weight of that gift. She'd kissed him when he'd handed her the card, whispering, "Thank you," like he'd given her something precious rather than just practical. They fell into an easy routine over the next 3 days, Vivian spending days with her family while Jackson worked. Evenings together building intimacy through conversation and proximity. Nights spent in comfortable sleeping arrangements that respected boundaries while offering presence. By Wednesday, when Robert was discharged to his home with medical equipment and nursing support Jackson had arranged, their relationship felt settled despite its newness, felt solid despite being built in crisis, felt permanent despite only being days old. Thursday morning, Vivian appeared at Jackson's office at 8:47 a.m., dressed in professional attire for the first time in over a week, charcoal skirt, burgundy blouse, heels that added 3 inches to her height. She looked like the assistant he'd worked with for 2 years, except her expression held something new, confidence born of being chosen, security that came from being protected, love that had been acknowledged and reciprocated. She knocked on his office door frame, unnecessary since the door was open, but maintaining professional courtesy. "Mr. Wolf, do you have a moment?" The formality made Jackson smile despite understanding its purpose. At work, they were boss and assistant. Professional, appropriate. "Come in, Vivian. Close the door." She entered, closing the door with a soft click, her professional facade cracking slightly as she approached his desk. "I wanted to officially return to work. Dad's home, Stable, healing, Mom has support. The crisis is managed. I'm ready to resume my responsibilities if you still want me here. If I still want you? Jackson repeated, standing, moving around his desk to stand directly in front of her. Vivian, I've been lost without you. My temporary secretary is competent, but she's not you. No one is you. Of course I want you back. Need you back. Professionally and personally. Then I'd like to return Monday, Vivian said. I want to spend this weekend with my family. Make sure Dad's settled. But Monday I'll be here. Full time. Ready to work. Perfect, Jackson said. Then, because they were behind closed doors and professional boundaries allowed brief personal moments. I've missed you here. Missed working with you. Missed the way you make chaos function smoothly. I've missed this too, Vivian admitted. Missed the structure. Missed feeling useful. Missed you. Even though I've been seeing you every evening, I've missed working beside you. Is that strange? Not at all, Jackson said. We're good together, professionally and personally. Both matter. Both contribute to what we're building. Vivian moved closer, her hand reaching for his tie, straightening it unnecessarily. We're really doing this, building something real, making it work despite complications. Yes, Jackson confirmed. We're really doing this. She kissed him then brief, appropriate for an office setting, communicating affection without crossing into unprofessional territory. When she pulled back, both were smiling. Monday, she said. I'll see you Monday. Professional, appropriate, your assistant who also happens to be your girlfriend. My assistant who also happens to be mine, Jackson corrected. Permanently. Possessive, Vivian said fondly. Always, Jackson confirmed. She left his office, returning to her desk outside the space that had been empty all week, the position that had felt vacant without her presence. And Jackson returned to his work knowing that Monday would bring back the professional competence he relied on and the personal connection he'd discovered he couldn't live without. Everything was falling into place. Robert was recovering. Vivian was returning to work. Their relationship was solidifying. Crisis had transformed into foundation. Impossible had become reality. And Jackson Wolf, who'd spent 15 years building an empire in isolation, finally understood what all that power and wealth was actually for: protecting what mattered, providing for people he loved, building something permanent with the woman who'd become more important than any territory he'd ever controlled. She was his. He was hers. Forever was no longer theoretical. It was beginning. Monday morning arrived with the familiar rhythm of routine. Jackson's alarm at 5:30 a.m. Morning workout, shower, coffee, the drive to his office building as the city was still waking. But this morning held anticipation that had nothing to do with business meetings or contract negotiations. Vivian was coming back. He arrived at the office at 7:15, earlier than necessary. Driven by eagerness, he didn't bother disguising from himself. The executive floor was quiet. Most employees wouldn't arrive until 8, but when Jackson stepped off the elevator, he found Vivian already at her desk, organizing files with the efficient grace that defined everything she did. She looked up when she heard him, her professional smile transforming into something warmer when their eyes met. "Good morning, Mr. Wolf." The formality felt both right and wrong, appropriate for their setting, but inadequate for what they'd become. "Good morning, Vivian." "You're early. I wanted to review everything I missed," Vivian explained, gesturing at the neat stacks covering her desk. "Your temporary secretary was organized, but her systems are different from mine. I'm translating back to methods that actually work." "I appreciate the dedication," Jackson said, then added quietly, "I missed seeing you here. Missed working with you." "I missed it too," Vivian admitted, her voice equally quiet despite the empty office giving them privacy. "Missed the rhythm. Missed being useful. Missed you." They stared at each other for a moment too long for strictly professional interaction, the air between them charged with awareness of everything unsaid, everything that had changed, everything they were choosing not to express in this context. "I should let you settle in," Jackson said finally, forcing himself toward his office. "If you need anything, I know where to find you," Vivian finished, her eyes holding promise of conversations they'd have later, outside office hours, in contexts that allowed them to be something other than boss and assistant. Jackson entered his office, closing the door, immediately aware of Vivian's presence just beyond the glass walls. He could see her moving around her desk, fielding phone calls with practiced efficiency, organizing his schedule with the competence that had made her invaluable long before he'd fallen in love with her. Watching her work now held different weight. She wasn't just his competent assistant, she was the woman he loved. demonstrating the strength and capability that had attracted him initially, proving that Crisis hadn't diminished her professional excellence, but had instead revealed depths he'd been too blind to fully appreciate before. The morning proceeded with familiar efficiency calls. Vivian screened perfectly. Meetings she'd rescheduled with appropriate priorities. Contracts she'd organized exactly how he preferred. By noon, Jackson's professional life had returned to the smooth functionality only Vivian could provide. Chaos transformed into order through her intervention. At 12:30, Vivian appeared in his doorway with her tablet. "You have a 1 o'clock with the development team about the Riverside project. I've prepared briefing documents with updated financials and timeline projections. Is there anything specific you want me to emphasize in the presentation?" Professional, appropriate, exactly what any assistant would ask, but something in her eyes communicated more awareness of him. Connection that went beyond professional interaction. Love she was choosing not to express in this setting. "The timeline concerns me," Jackson said, keeping his own tone equally professional despite wanting to pull her into his office and kiss her until neither remembered why professional boundaries mattered. "Emphasize consequences of delays. Make it clear extensions aren't acceptable." "Understood," Vivian said, making notes on her tablet. "I'll adjust the presentation accordingly. Anything else?" "Have you eaten lunch?" Jackson asked, the question personal despite their professional setting. "Not yet," Vivian admitted. "I was planning to grab something from the cafe downstairs between meetings." "Cancel that plan," Jackson said. "I'm ordering from the Italian place. You liked the carbonara last week. I'll have them deliver enough for both of us." "Mr. Wolf," Vivian started, professional protest automatic. "Jackson," he corrected quietly. "When we're alone, even here, I'm Jackson, and I'm feeding you, Vivian. That's non-negotiable." Her expression softened, from professional to personal, boundaries blurring briefly. "Thank you. Carbonara sounds perfect." The food arrived 40 minutes later, delivered to Jackson's office where Vivian joined him for a working lunch that felt more intimate than their setting should have allowed. They discussed business upcoming contracts, territorial negotiations, meetings that required his personal attention, but underneath the professional conversation lay constant awareness of everything unspoken. "This is strange," Vivian said, eventually setting down her fork. "Being here with you, working beside you, maintaining professional interaction when I spent the weekend falling asleep in your arms. I don't know how to reconcile both versions of us." "We don't reconcile them," Jackson said. "We maintain them separately. At work, you're my assistant. I'm your boss. We're professional, but after hours outside these walls, we're equals building a relationship. The contexts don't conflict if we're clear about which role we're inhabiting." "And when they blur?" Vivian asked. "When you look at me across your desk and I can see you're thinking about things that have nothing to do with business? Then we acknowledge the blur privately and maintain professional boundaries publicly," Jackson said. "We're navigating complicated territory, Vivian. It won't always be comfortable, but we communicate. We establish boundaries. We respect the contexts we've agreed to maintain." "You make it sound simple," Vivian said. "It's not simple," Jackson corrected. "It's deliberate. It's choosing to respect both relationships instead of letting one compromise the other. It's—" A knock interrupted them, Marcus entering with documents that required immediate attention. Vivian immediately shifted from personal to professional, collecting lunch containers, thanking Jackson formally for the meal, exiting his office with practiced efficiency that gave Marcus no indication anything beyond standard employer-employee interaction had just occurred. Jackson watched her go, appreciating her ability to transition seamlessly between contexts, grateful she understood the importance of maintaining boundaries even when they made intimacy more complicated. The afternoon proceeded with steady professionalism meetings. Vivian managed flawlessly, calls she handled with her usual competence, the rhythm of working together that had defined their relationship for 2 years before crisis and confession had transformed everything. At 6:47 p.m., most employees had left for the day. Vivian appeared in Jackson's office doorway, her professional facade finally cracking as the office emptied. "Everyone's gone. It's just us." "Come here," Jackson said immediately, standing from his desk, abandoning the contracts he'd been reviewing. Vivian crossed the office quickly, practically running into his arms, the professional distance she'd maintained all day dissolving as he pulled her close. "That was harder than I expected. Maintaining boundaries, pretending you're just my boss when you're so much more." "I know," Jackson said, his face buried in her hair, breathing in her familiar scent. "But you did it perfectly. No one would suspect we're anything other than professional colleagues. Is that good?" Vivian asked. Do we want to hide this? Hide us? We're not hiding, Jackson corrected. We're being strategic. Once our relationship becomes public knowledge, everything changes. People will question your competence. Will assume you got your position through personal connection rather than merit. Will gossip and speculate and make both our lives more complicated. I want to protect you from that as long as possible. So we keep it private, Vivian said. Secret. Just ours. Just ours, Jackson confirmed. Until we're ready for public scrutiny. Until we've built a foundation strong enough to survive other people's opinions. Is that okay with you? Yes, Vivian said. I don't need public declaration. Don't need everyone to know. I just need you. Need this. Need the certainty that when the workday ends, I get to be yours instead of just your assistant. You're always mine, Jackson said firmly. At work and outside of it. The context changes, but the belonging doesn't. Possessive, Vivian said, the familiar refrain affectionate. Always, Jackson confirmed. They stood in his office, holding each other, savoring privacy and proximity after a day of maintained distance. Eventually, Vivian pulled back, her hand reaching for his face with tender familiarity. Take me home. To your place. I want to fall asleep in your arms and wake up with you tomorrow. Want to build more of this foundation we're creating. My place is your place, Jackson said. You know that, right? You're not a guest. You're yours, Vivian finished. I know. And you're mine. They left the office together, Jackson's hand at the small of Vivian's back as they walked to the elevator, a gesture that could be professional courtesy but felt infinitely more intimate. The building security nodded respectfully. If they suspected anything beyond professional relationship, they were too well trained and well compensated to indicate it. The drive to Jackson's penthouse was quiet, comfortable, both of them processing the first day of their new reality, working together while building personal relationship, maintaining professional boundaries while nurturing intimate connection, being both boss and assistant, and something infinitely more complicated and precious. Today was good, Vivian said as they pulled into Jackson's private garage. Hard but good. I think we can make this work. Think we can maintain both versions of us without letting one compromise the other. We absolutely can, Jackson said with certainty. We're both disciplined, both committed to getting this right, both willing to do the work required to build something sustainable. They entered his penthouse, Vivian's second home now, the space where she'd spent most nights since her father's surgery, where comfort and belonging had replaced the careful formality of new relationship. She kicked off her heels immediately, abandoning professional attire for the borrowed sweatpants and oversized shirt that had become her unofficial uniform in Jackson's space. I love that you're comfortable here, Jackson observed, watching her move through his kitchen with easy familiarity. I love that you want me comfortable here, Vivian countered. Love that you're not trying to make me into something different, that you're letting me just exist, as myself, without performance or pretense. That's what love is, Jackson said simply. Letting someone be themselves. Supporting who they are, instead of demanding they become what you want. You're perfect exactly as you are, Vivian. I wouldn't change anything. Even my stubborn independence? Vivian asked. Even my tendency to carry burdens alone instead of asking for help. Especially those things, Jackson said. Because they're part of what makes you strong. Part of what I love. I just want you to understand that being independent doesn't mean being alone. That you can be strong while also accepting support. That asking for help isn't weakness, it's trust. I'm learning that, Vivian said quietly. Learning to lean on you. Learning that being yours doesn't mean losing myself. Learning that partnership can coexist with independence. Keep learning, Jackson encouraged. We'll both keep learning. Keep growing. Keep building this foundation together. They spent the evening in comfortable domesticity dinner they prepared together. Mindless television neither paid much attention to. Conversation that ranged from important to trivial with equal weight given to both. And when they eventually fell asleep, tangled together in Jackson's bed, both felt the deep security that came from choosing right, from building something real, from finding home in each other. This was their new normal. Working together, living together, being both professional colleagues and intimate partners, maintaining boundaries while building connection, being complicated and messy and absolutely perfect for each other. This was love. Not simple. Not easy, but absolutely worth every complication. This was forever beginning to solidify into reality, and neither would have changed a single thing. 3 months into their carefully balanced dual relationship, Vivian stood in Jackson's office at 8:47 p.m. on a Thursday, everyone else long gone, her professional composure finally cracking under the weight of something that had been building for weeks. "We need to talk," she said, closing his office door with deliberate finality. "About boundaries, about what we're doing, about how this is working and how it isn't." Jackson looked up from the contracts he'd been reviewing, immediately reading tension in Vivian's posture that had nothing to do with work stress. "What's wrong?" "Everything," Vivian said, then corrected. "No, not everything. Most things are perfect. But Jackson, today you moved my desk." "I moved your desk closer to my office," Jackson confirmed, uncertain why this was a problem. "So you're more accessible, so we can communicate more efficiently." So you can see me constantly," Vivian interrupted. "So you can monitor my movements, so you can maintain visual contact even when we're supposed to be working professionally." "Jackson, you moved my desk inside your office, right there." She pointed to the space beside his desk, where her workstation now sat. "Where I can't take a personal call without you hearing every word. Where I can't have a moment of privacy. Where the line between assistant and whatever else I am to you has completely disappeared." Jackson stood, moving around his desk, reading genuine distress beneath Vivian's controlled frustration. "I thought you'd appreciate being closer. Thought it would make working together easier." "It makes maintaining boundaries impossible," Vivian corrected. "It makes every employee in this building aware that I'm not just your assistant anymore. It broadcasts our relationship to everyone who sees me sitting inside your private office, instead of at the professional distance I've maintained for 3 years. It compromises my credibility and makes me look like exactly what I've been trying not to be, the assistant who's sleeping with her boss." The accusation hit harder than Vivian probably intended. "You're not the assistant sleeping with her boss. You're the woman I love who also happens to work for me. There's a significant difference." "Not to everyone else," Vivian said, her voice breaking slightly. "Not to the employees who are now whispering every time I walk past. Not to the colleagues who assume I got my position through personal connection rather than competence. Not to the professional reputation I've spent years building that's being destroyed because you need to see me constantly." "I didn't realize," Jackson said quietly, the admission difficult. "Didn't think about how it would look to others. I wanted you closer. Wanted to work beside you. Wanted control," Vivian finished. "You wanted control. Visual confirmation that I'm here. That I'm yours. That I haven't disappeared. Jackson, I understand your protective instincts. I understand that your world makes you hypervigilant. But moving my desk inside your office isn't protection, it's possession. And I can't be possessed like that. Not even by someone I love." The honesty in her voice, the pain beneath the frustration, made Jackson realize how badly he'd miscalculated. "You're right. I overstepped. Let my need for proximity override your need for professional boundaries. I'm sorry." "I don't want apologies," Vivian said. "I want clear boundaries. I want to know where work ends and relationship begins. I want to understand what I am to you in different contexts. Because right now, Jackson, I feel like I'm losing myself in being yours. Like my identity is being subsumed into being your assistant, your girlfriend, your possession. And I can't lose myself. Not even for love." Jackson felt something crack in his chest, recognition that his protective instincts had crossed into controlling behavior. That his need to keep Vivian close had compromised her autonomy, that loving her meant giving her space even when every instinct demanded he hold tighter. "Tell me what you need," Jackson said quietly. "Tell me how to love you without overwhelming you. Tell me what boundaries look like that protect both our relationship and your independence." Vivian took a shaky breath, clearly having prepared for this conversation, having thought through exactly what she needed to say. "My desk goes back outside your office, in the reception area where it was for 3 years before we became us. At work, I'm your assistant. Just your assistant. You treat me with professional courtesy. You don't touch me in ways that suggest intimacy. You don't look at me like I'm yours when other employees can see. You maintain the boundary between boss and employee, so I can maintain my professional credibility." "Okay," Jackson agreed immediately. "What else?" "After hours, I need my own space sometimes," Vivian continued. "I need nights where I go to my apartment instead of your penthouse. Need time alone to remember who I am outside of being yours. Need to not lose my identity in loving you. Can you understand that? Can you give me space without interpreting it as rejection?" The question hit at Jackson's deepest fear, that space meant distance, that distance meant loss, that giving Vivian independence meant losing her entirely. But looking at her face, seeing genuine distress mixed with love, he understood that holding too tight would destroy what he was trying to protect. I can understand that, Jackson said carefully. Can give you space even though my instinct is to hold closer. Can trust that you asking for independence doesn't mean you're leaving. Can, he paused, forcing honesty, can learn to love you without possessing you, even though possession feels like safety to me. It's not safety, Vivian said gently, moving closer now, her hand reaching for his face with the tenderness that always undid him. Possession is control disguised as protection. Safety is trust. Safety is believing I'll come back even when you give me space. Safety is understanding that I'm choosing you every day, not because you're holding me captive, but because I want to be here. I'm afraid, Jackson admitted, the confession difficult. Afraid that giving you space means losing you. Afraid that you'll realize you don't need me. Afraid that independence will become preference for being alone. I've spent 15 years alone, Vivian. I don't know how to love someone without trying to keep them close enough that losing them becomes impossible. But that's not love, Vivian said, tears now sliding down her face. That's fear. That's trauma from being abandoned as a child. That's trying to control outcomes instead of trusting people. Jackson, I love you. I'm not leaving. But I need you to trust that my staying is choice, not captivity. I need you to believe that giving me space strengthens us instead of weakening us. I need you to love me enough to let me breathe. The words were devastating in their accuracy. Jackson had been controlling, had been letting fear dictate behavior, had been trying to eliminate possibility of loss by eliminating Vivian's freedom to choose. And he'd been justifying it as protection when it was really self-protection, guarding against abandonment by making abandonment impossible. You're right, Jackson said, his voice rough with emotion he rarely let surface. I've been controlling, been letting my fear override your needs, been loving you the way I know how instead of the way you need. I'm sorry, Vivian. Sorry for moving your desk. Sorry for compromising your professional reputation. Sorry for holding so tight I was suffocating what I was trying to protect. I don't need apologies, Vivian said again, gentler this time. I need action. I need you to move my desk back. I need you to give me space when I ask for it. I need you to trust that I'm yours by choice, not by necessity or gratitude or because you've made leaving impossible. Can you do that? Can you love me with open hands instead of closed fists? I can try, Jackson said honestly. Can't promise I'll be perfect at it. Can't promise my instincts won't fight me constantly. But I can promise I'll try. Can promise I'll choose your needs over my fears. Can promise I'll learn to trust that you're staying because you want to, not because I'm holding you captive. That's all I'm asking, Vivian said. Effort, communication, willingness to grow. I'm not asking you to change who you are. I'm asking you to love me in ways that let me remain who I am. Can we do that? Can we build this relationship on trust instead of control? Yes, Jackson said firmly. We can do that, starting now. Tell me exactly what you need. Specific boundaries, clear expectations, concrete actions I can take to prove I'm choosing your well-being over my comfort. They spent the next 2 hours in Jackson's office, mapping boundaries with the same strategic precision Jackson applied to business negotiations. Vivian's desk would move back to the reception area first thing Monday morning. At work, their interaction would be strictly professional, no intimate touches, no possessive looks, no behavior that would compromise Vivian's credibility. After hours, they'd maintain their relationship, but Vivian would spend at least 2 nights a week at her own apartment, maintaining her independence and personal space. They'd communicate openly about needs and fears instead of letting resentments build. They'd check in regularly about whether boundaries were working or needed adjustment. By the time they finished, both felt lighter. The tension that had been building for weeks finally addressed, the foundation of their relationship strengthened by honest conversation instead of weakened by unspoken frustration. Thank you, Vivian said as they prepared to leave. For listening, for being willing to change, for loving me enough to let me be myself instead of just being yours. Thank you for being brave enough to tell me when I was failing you, Jackson countered. For not just accepting behavior that made you uncomfortable. For trusting that I could hear criticism without withdrawing love. You've taught me more about healthy relationship in 3 months than I learned in 37 years before you. We're learning together, Vivian said, threading her fingers through his. Building this relationship one honest conversation at a time. Making mistakes and fixing them. Being imperfect but committed. I love you, Jackson said. Not perfectly, not without fear or controlling instincts, but genuinely, completely, with commitment to becoming better for you. I love you too, Vivian said. With all my independence and stubbornness and need for space, with trust that you're worth the vulnerability, with certainty that we're building something real. They left the office together, driving separate cars to their separate homes, Vivian to her apartment to reclaim space she'd been neglecting, Jackson to his penthouse to learn how to sleep alone without interpreting her absence as abandonment. It was hard, harder than Jackson expected. He lay in bed that held Vivian's scent, in space she'd made home, and fought every instinct to call her, to demand she come back, to eliminate the distance she'd requested. But he didn't. He respected her boundary. He chose trust over control. He proved through action that he could love her with open hands. And when Vivian texted at 11:47 p.m., I miss you, but I needed this. Thank you for understanding. I love you. Jackson felt something shift. Not loss, but growth. Not distance, but trust. Not control, but genuine partnership. I miss you too, he texted back. Sleep well. I'll see you Monday. I love you. And for the first time in 15 years, Jackson Wolf chose trust over certainty, openness over control, love over fear. It was terrifying. It was necessary. It was right. 6 months into their relationship, 3 months after the boundary conversation that had reset their foundation, Vivian sat in Jackson's newly reorganized office on a Friday evening, her desk back in its original position outside his door, professional distance restored in ways that actually strengthened, rather than weakened, their connection. She was reviewing contracts when Jackson emerged from his office, not with professional request, but with personal intensity that made her look up immediately. Come with me, he said quietly. I want to show you something. Vivian saved her work, following him into his office where he closed the door and guided her to the window overlooking the city. The sun was setting, painting skyscrapers in gold and amber, the view spectacular in ways she'd seen hundreds of times but never quite like this, with Jackson's arms around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder, his breath warm against her ear. 6 months ago, Jackson said quietly, I looked at your phone and discovered a crisis I didn't know existed. Discovered you were drowning while pretending to be fine. Discovered that the woman I'd been falling for was stronger and braver and more stubborn than I'd realized. 6 months ago, you saved my father's life, Vivian said, her hands covering his where they rested against her stomach. Saved my family. Saved me from drowning alone. We saved each other, Jackson corrected. You saved me from isolation, from building an empire that meant nothing, from thinking power was more important than connection. You taught me that loving someone means trusting them, not controlling them. That protection without freedom isn't protection, it's captivity. And you taught me that asking for help isn't weakness, Vivian said. That being independent doesn't mean being alone. That I can be strong while also accepting support. That love is someone choosing to carry burdens with you, instead of making you carry them alone. I want to ask you something, Jackson said, his voice carrying weight that made Vivian's heart race. Something important. Something I've been planning for weeks, but couldn't find the right moment to voice. And then I realized there is no perfect moment. There's just honesty. There's just choosing to be brave. There's just this. He turned her in his arms so they were facing each other, his hands framing her face with the tenderness that always undid her. Vivian Croft, will you marry me? The question hung between them, enormous and terrifying and perfect. Vivian's breath caught, her eyes filling with tears she didn't try to stop. Jackson, I don't have a ring yet, Jackson continued quickly, as if afraid she'd refuse if he gave her time to think. I wanted to ask you first. Wanted to make sure you'd say yes before I presumed to choose something you'd wear forever. But Vivian, I'm certain about this. Certain about you. Certain about us. I want to marry you. Want to build a life with you that's legal and binding and permanent in every way possible. Want you to be my wife, not just my girlfriend or my assistant or the woman I love. Want everything with you, forever, if you'll have me. You want to marry me, Vivian repeated, processing the enormity of what he was asking. You want permanent, legal, binding commitment. I want you, Jackson said simply. In every way I can have you, as my wife, as my partner, as the woman I build my life around instead of just including in my existing life. I want to wake up with you every morning knowing you're mine legally and emotionally. Want to build something that survives difficulty because we've chosen commitment over convenience. Want to prove that what we've built is real and permanent and worth formalizing. What about work? Vivian asked, her legal mind immediately jumping to complications. What about professional boundaries? If I'm your wife, I can't be your assistant. The power dynamic becomes, then you're not my assistant anymore, Jackson interrupted. You transition to whatever role you want. Partner in the business if you want involvement. Philanthropic director if you want to manage our charitable giving. Completely separate career if you want independence. Or nothing at all if you want freedom to pursue whatever interests you. Vivian, I'm not asking you to marry me so I can keep you as my assistant. I'm asking you to marry me because I love you, and I want you in my life permanently in whatever capacity makes you happiest. You'd let me stop working for you, Vivian said slowly, testing this offer, looking for the control she'd learned to watch for. I'd support whatever decision you make, Jackson corrected. If you want to continue as my assistant, we'll navigate the complications of being married while maintaining professional relationship. If you want to transition to something else, I'll support that completely. If you want to take time to figure out what you actually want, instead of what circumstances have dictated, I'll support that too. Your happiness matters more than my convenience. You've changed, Vivian observed. 6 months ago, you moved my desk inside your office because you needed to see me constantly. Now you're offering to support me, leaving my position entirely if that's what I want. That's significant growth. You changed me, Jackson said. Taught me that loving you means trusting you. That control isn't safety, it's fear. That the best way to keep you is to give you freedom to choose me every day, instead of making leaving impossible. I'm not perfect at it yet. My instincts still scream to hold tighter. But I'm learning, because you're worth learning for. Vivian was crying openly now, emotions overwhelming her capacity for composure. Ask me again, officially, not as a strategic decision or a way to formalize what we've built. Ask me because you love me and you want to marry me and you're choosing me forever. Jackson dropped to one knee right there in his office, Vivian's hand still in his, the gesture formal and old-fashioned and absolutely perfect. Vivian Croft, I love you. I love your strength and your stubbornness and your refusal to let anyone, including me, diminish your independence. I love how you've taught me to be better, to love openly instead of possessively, to choose trust over control. I love that you're brave enough to tell me when I'm failing you and patient enough to let me learn how to succeed. I love everything about you, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving that love through action instead of just words. Will you marry me? Will you be my wife? Will you choose me forever the way I'm choosing you? Yes, Vivian said, the word breaking on a sob. Yes, Jackson Wolf. I'll marry you. I'll be your wife. I'll choose you forever. I'll build this life with you that we've both been learning how to create. Yes. Absolutely yes. Jackson stood, pulling her into his arms, kissing her with the intensity of 6 months of building trust and foundation and commitment that was about to become legally binding. When they broke apart, both were crying, both were laughing, both were overwhelmed by the enormity of what they'd just promised each other. We're getting married, Vivian said, testing the words, finding them perfect. We're getting married, Jackson confirmed. Permanently, legally, completely. You're going to be my wife, and you're going to be my husband, Vivian said. My partner, my equal. Not my boss, my husband. That's extraordinary. That's love, Jackson corrected. That's what we've built. That's what we're formalizing. Not control or possession or gratitude, but genuine partnership between equals who choose each other despite every complication. They spent the rest of the evening planning not elaborate weddings or formal ceremonies, but the foundation of their marriage. Vivian would transition from assistant to business partner, assuming responsibilities that utilized her organizational brilliance without the problematic power dynamic of employee-employer. They'd maintain the penthouse as primary residence while keeping Vivian's apartment for when she needed personal space. They'd build their lives together while maintaining individual identities. I have one condition, Vivian said eventually. One non-negotiable requirement for marrying you. Name it, Jackson said immediately. We see a couples therapist, Vivian said. Regularly. Not because we're failing, but because I want us to succeed. I want professional support in navigating your controlling instincts and my independence. I want help maintaining boundaries. I want tools for communication. I want to build this marriage on the strongest possible foundation. Can you do that? Can you commit to therapy even though it means acknowledging we need help? Yes, Jackson said without hesitation. Absolutely yes. If professional support strengthens what we're building, then therapy is non-negotiable. I'll do whatever it takes to love you well, Vivian. Whatever it takes to be the husband you deserve. If that means weekly sessions with a therapist who'll call me out when I'm being controlling, then that's what we do. Thank you, Vivian said. for being willing to do the work, for not assuming love is enough without effort, for being exactly what I needed even when I didn't know I needed it. Thank you for choosing me, Jackson countered. For being brave enough to love someone whose instincts fight against healthy relationship. For teaching me that opening my hands doesn't mean losing what I'm holding. For proving that love is stronger than fear. They left the office together that night, engaged, committed, ready to build permanent instead of just sustainable. And when Vivian went to her own apartment, maintaining the boundary they'd established even on a night when celebration could have justified exception, Jackson felt only pride instead of fear. She was choosing space. And she was still his. Would always be his. Not because he was holding her captive, but because she was choosing him freely. That was love. That was trust. That was everything. The wedding happened 3 months later on a Saturday in October. Small and private and perfect. Just immediate family, Vivian's parents and siblings. A few of Jackson's trusted associates, who'd become something like friends over years of working together. No elaborate ceremony. No ostentatious display of wealth. Just honest vows exchanged in the penthouse that had become home to both of them. Vivian wore cream instead of white. A simple dress that was elegant without being traditional. Jackson wore a suit that cost more than most weddings, but looked understated. His focus entirely on the woman walking toward him with her father at her side. Robert Croft, healthy now, recovered completely, alive because Jackson had chosen to help 9 months ago, when crisis could have ended differently. You saved my daughter, Robert had said that morning while helping Jackson with his tie. The older man's hands steady and sure in ways they hadn't been months earlier. Saved her from drowning alone. Saved her father. Saved her family. And then you had the courage to let her be herself instead of trying to possess her. That's extraordinary. My daughter chose well. I'm the one who chose well, Jackson had corrected. She's everything. Everything I didn't know I needed. Everything I didn't know how to want. She saved me just as much as I saved her. Now, watching Vivian walk toward him, Jackson felt emotion threaten his legendary composure. She was beautiful not in the generic way brides were supposed to be beautiful, but in the specific way that was uniquely hers. Strong, independent, choosing him with clear eyes and full awareness of every complication that came with loving a man like him. The ceremony was brief. The officiant kept it simple, asking the traditional questions that held weight beyond their familiar phrasing. Do you, Jackson Wolfe, take Vivian Croft to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do you part? I do, Jackson said, his voice steady despite the emotion making his chest tight. Absolutely, permanently, forever. And do you, Vivian Croft, take Jackson Wolfe to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do you part? I do, Vivian said, her eyes locked on Jackson's, communicating everything beyond the simple words. Completely, by choice, forever. They'd written their own vows, insisted on personal promises beyond the traditional phrasing. Jackson spoke first, his hands holding Vivian's with a gentleness that still surprised him months into learning how to love openly. Vivian, 9 months ago, I looked at your phone expecting to find a rival and instead found a crisis. Found you drowning while pretending to be fine. Found the woman I loved carrying impossible burdens alone. And I made you a promise to protect you, to support you, to solve the impossible so you didn't have to face it alone. Today, I'm making new promises. I promise to love you with open hands instead of closed fists. I promise to trust your independence instead of fearing it. I promise to be your partner instead of your protector, or rather, to protect you while respecting you, support you while trusting you, love you while letting you be fully yourself. I promise to keep growing, keep learning, keep becoming better for you. I promise forever, Vivian. Not as possession, but as choice, as partnership, as love. Vivian's turn came, her voice breaking slightly with emotion but remaining strong. Jackson, 9 months ago you saved my father's life, saved my family, saved me from drowning in crisis I was carrying alone. But more than that, you taught me that asking for help isn't weakness, that being independent doesn't mean being alone, that love is someone choosing to carry burdens with you instead of making you carry them alone. Today I'm making promises. I promise to trust you with my vulnerabilities instead of hiding them. I promise to ask for help instead of drowning in pride. I promise to be your partner, equal, honest, willing to do the hard work of maintaining healthy boundaries while building intimate connection. I promise to keep challenging you when your instincts slide toward control, to keep trusting you when you prove you're choosing growth, to keep loving you through every complication. I promise forever, Jackson, not because you've made leaving impossible, but because I'm choosing to stay. Choosing you, choosing us. The officiant declared them married. Jackson kissed his wife with tenderness that communicated years of commitment condensed into a single moment, and their small audience erupted in applause that felt earned rather than obligatory. The reception was casual catered dinner, easy conversation, the comfort of family rather than the performance of elaborate celebration. Catherine Croft cried happily through most of it. Robert gave a toast about second chances, and the man who'd given his family theirs. Vivian's siblings welcomed Jackson into their family with warmth that suggested he'd already been accepted months ago when he'd first proven his commitment. But the moment that mattered most came late in the evening, after most guests had left, when Jackson and Vivian stood alone on the penthouse balcony overlooking the city they both called home. "We did it," Vivian said quietly, her head resting against Jackson's shoulder, her left hand displaying the platinum band he'd chosen with her input simple, elegant, understated in ways that matched her personality. "We're married. We're building this life together. We're actually doing this. We're doing this," Jackson confirmed, his arms wrapped around her waist, holding her close but not tightly, protective but not possessive. "Building something real, something permanent, something that proves love is stronger than fear." "Are you scared?" Vivian asked. "Now that it's legal and binding and permanent?" "Terrified," Jackson admitted honestly. "Terrified I'll revert to controlling behavior. Terrified I'll fail you. Terrified I'll lose you despite all my efforts to deserve you. But also certain. Certain that you're worth the fear. Certain that what we're building matters more than the terror. Certain that loving you is the best decision I've ever made." "I'm scared too," Vivian said. "Scared I'll lose myself in being yours. Scared I'll stop asking for space when I need it. Scared I'll let your strength become excuse for my weakness. But also certain. Certain that you'll keep me accountable. Certain that you'll respect my boundaries. Certain that we're stronger together than we were alone. We're going to be okay," Jackson said, and for the first time since childhood, he actually believed in okay. Believed in sustainable. Believed in permanent. "We're going to do the work. We're going to communicate. We're going to build this marriage on foundation we've spent 9 months creating. We're going to be okay. Better than okay," Vivian corrected. "We're going to be extraordinary. We're going to be the marriage that survives because we're honest instead of comfortable. We're going to be the partnership that thrives because we do the work instead of assuming love is enough. We're going to be home," Jackson finished quietly. "We're going to be home. For each other. Finally. Permanently. Completely." Vivian turned in his arms, her hands framing his face with the tenderness she'd been offering for 9 months. "You know what I realized today? During the ceremony? When I was saying vows?" "What?" Jackson asked. "That the safest I've ever felt wasn't when you solved my crisis, or saved my father, or proved you had resources to eliminate threats," Vivian said. "The safest I've ever felt was when you heard me say I needed boundaries and you chose to respect them despite every instinct telling you to hold tighter. That moment, that choice, that's when I knew you were safe. Not because you're powerful, but because you're willing to choose my well-being over your comfort. That's real safety. That's real love. You've taught me what real love looks like," Jackson said, his voice rough with emotion. "Taught me that opening my hands doesn't mean losing what I'm holding. Taught me that trust is stronger than control. Taught me that the best way to keep someone is to give them freedom to choose you every single day. You've taught me everything that matters. And you've taught me that asking for help isn't weakness," Vivian countered. "That being independent doesn't mean being alone. That I can be strong while also accepting support. That partnership is stronger than pride. That love is someone choosing to carry burdens with you, instead of making you carry them alone. You've saved me in ways that have nothing to do with money or resources. You've saved me by teaching me I don't have to save myself alone." They stood on the balcony as evening deepened into night, the city below them glittering with lights. The life they were building together spread out before them, with all its promise and complication and absolute certainty. "I love you," Jackson said. "More than I thought I was capable of loving anyone. More than I knew how to want before you taught me. Completely. Permanently. With commitment to keep growing and learning and becoming better for you." "I love you too," Vivian said. "With all my independence and stubbornness and need for space. With trust that you're worth the vulnerability. With certainty that we've built something real. With commitment to keep choosing you every day for the rest of our lives. Forever," Jackson said. Forever, Vivian agreed. And in a penthouse overlooking a city that bowed to one man's empire, two people who'd saved each other from drowning stood together and understood what they'd built. Not perfection, not ease, not the fantasy of love without effort, but partnership, built on honesty and trust and boundaries respected as much as promises made. But home, found in each other after years of isolation and independence that had protected them but also left them alone. But love, real love, the kind that grew stronger through challenge instead of weakening under pressure, the kind that was built through communication instead of just feeling, the kind that was chosen every single day instead of just declared once and assumed permanent. They'd built something extraordinary, something that had started in crisis and crystallized into commitment, something that had survived complications and grown stronger through honest conversation, something that proved love was action, not just emotion, effort, not just feeling, choice, not just circumstance. Jackson Wolf had spent 15 years building an empire in isolation, convinced that power meant safety and control meant security. Vivian Croft had spent years being independent, convinced that strength meant carrying burdens alone and asking for help meant weakness. Together, they'd discovered that real strength was vulnerability, that real security was trust, that real power was choosing to love someone with open hands, knowing they might leave but trusting they'll stay. They'd discovered home, not in a place, but in each other. And home, they'd learned, was worth everything. Worth the fear of vulnerability, worth the work of communication, worth the effort of maintaining boundaries while building intimacy, worth choosing every single day for the rest of their lives, worth forever, which had started 9 months ago when a jealous man had looked at his assistant's phone expecting betrayal and instead found crisis that would change everything. Forever, which was solidified in vows exchanged before family that had been saved and built and chosen. Forever, which was beginning right now, in this moment, on this balcony, with these two people who'd saved each other. Forever, home, love, finally.